Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Samuel Redfeather, and I need to tell you about what happened on Blood Mountain in July of 1984. People need to know the truth, even if they won't believe it. I'd been a park ranger for 21 years by then. Started right after I came back from Vietnam in '73. The forest felt like home after growing up on the Qualla boundary with my Cherokee grandmother. She taught me the old ways, the old stories. I thought they were just stories back then. At 48, I'd seen plenty of strange things in the woods. Bears that walked on two legs for a few steps. Sounds that didn't match any animal I knew. But I always found normal reasons for everything. That's what you do when you're a professional. You look for facts, not fairy tales. The summer of '84 was the hottest anyone could remember. No rain for 6 weeks. The creek beds were cracking and the trees looked tired. Even the animals acted different, more nervous, like they were waiting for something bad to happen. My wife Sarah taught at the Cherokee school, and our 3 boys were all grown up with families of their own. Sarah used to laugh when I'd come home with my ghost stories from the forest. "Sam," she'd say, "you sound like your grandmother with all her old legends." I worked the Blood Mountain area mostly. It's part of the Appalachian Trail, way back in the wilderness where you have to hike 8 miles just to reach the nearest road. City folks loved it because it felt wild and dangerous, but safe enough for weekend camping trips. Cherokee people knew better. We stayed away from certain places up there. The first sign something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning in July. I got a call about some missing hikers, a young couple from Atlanta who hadn't checked in when they were supposed to. Their families were worried sick. I drove out to the trailhead and started hiking in, found their camp after about 3 miles. What I saw there made my stomach turn. Their tent was shredded like someone had taken a giant pair of scissors to it. Sleeping bags torn open, feathers everywhere. Food scattered around, but not eaten, just destroyed. The weird part was what I didn't find. No blood, no bodies, just 2 backpacks hanging from a tree branch about 15 feet up, too high for a person to reach without a ladder. I called it in and spent the rest of the day looking for tracks. Found some, but they didn't make sense. They started out looking like boot prints, then seemed to change into something else, something with claws. My partner that day was Officer Janice Parks from the State Wildlife Department. She was young, maybe 28, fresh out of college with a degree in animal behavior. Smart as a whip, but still believed everything had a scientific explanation. "Probably a bear," she said, looking at the destroyed campsite. "Black bears can get aggressive in drought conditions." I nodded, but something felt wrong. In 21 years, I'd seen plenty of bear attacks. This wasn't one of them. That night, I called my grandmother. She was 83 and still sharp as a tack. I told her about the strange tracks and the way the animals were acting. "Samuel," she said in Cherokee, then switched to English. "Some things sleep until they're awakened. Some things guard what shouldn't be disturbed." "Grandmother, I need facts, not old stories." She was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes, grandson, the old stories are the only facts that matter." I didn't sleep well that night. Kept thinking about those backpacks hanging so high in the tree, and the way the forest had felt too quiet when I was up there. Like even the birds knew to stay away. The next morning brought more bad news. 2 more hikers were missing, and a 3rd group had stumbled into the ranger station around midnight, half crazy with fear. The survivors were college kids from University of Georgia. The girl, Amy, couldn't stop shaking. The boy, Derek, kept looking over his shoulder like something was following him. "It was huge," Derek said, "walking on 2 legs like a man but covered in hair. Its eyes..." He shuddered. "Its eyes looked human." I'd heard stories like this before, usually from city folks who'd never spent real time in the woods. Your mind plays tricks on you out there, especially at night. "How much did you have to drink?" I asked gently. Amy looked at me with tears in her eyes. "We weren't drinking. It followed us for miles. We could hear it breathing behind us, breaking branches. When we looked back with our flashlights, We could see something big moving between the trees. I took their statement and told them to get some rest. Then Janice and I headed back up the mountain with a full search team. We found the second missing couple's campsite around noon. Same thing, tent destroyed, gear scattered, no bodies. But this time, we found something else. "Sam," Janice called from near a big oak tree, "you need to see this." Carved into the bark, about 10 feet up, were marks that looked like claw scratches, but they were arranged in a pattern, almost like symbols, and there was something dark smeared around them. I climbed up for a closer look. The dark stuff was blood, but it was old and dried. The scratches were fresh, though, made recently. "What kind of animal can reach that high?" Janice asked. "None that I know of," I said, but I was thinking about my grandmother's stories, about things that were part man, part beast, things that could think and plan and hate. We kept searching until late afternoon, found more strange tracks. Sometimes they looked human, sometimes like a bear, sometimes like nothing I'd ever seen. They led us deeper into the forest, toward a part of Blood Mountain where even experienced hikers didn't go. That's when we heard it. A sound that made the hair on my neck stand up. It started low, like a bear's growl, but then rauker rose into something that sounded almost like words, like someone trying to speak with a mouthful of teeth. "What was that?" Janice whispered. Before I could answer, we heard crashing through the brush about 100 yards ahead of us. Something big was moving fast, but trying to be quiet about it. Every few seconds it would stop, like it was listening for us. I motioned for Janice to stay back and crept forward. Through the trees I could see a clearing ahead. As I got closer, the smell hit me. It was like death and wet fur and something else. Something that reminded me of the sweat lodge ceremonies my grandmother used to take me to. At the edge of the clearing, I stopped. There were bones scattered around. Some animal. Some that looked too much like human. And in the center, arranged in a circle, were 7 backpacks, the missing hiker's gear. But what made my blood run cold was what I saw at the far edge of the clearing. A shape, maybe 9 feet tall, standing upright like a man but built like a bear. It had its back to me, but I could see massive shoulders covered in dark hair. Its head was turned slightly, like it was listening. I started to back away, but stepped on a branch. The crack echoed through the clearing. The thing turned around. I only saw it for a second before I ran, but that second is burned into my memory forever. It had a bear's snout and teeth, but human eyes, intelligent eyes, angry eyes, and it smiled at me. I grabbed Janice and we ran back toward the trail as fast as we could. Behind us, I could hear it following. Not chasing, following, like it wanted us to know it was there. We made it back to the ranger station just as the sun was setting. I radioed for backup and told them to bring guns. Big ones. That night, I called my grandmother again. "It saw me," I told her. It looked right at me and smiled. She was quiet for a long time. Then, she said, "The Blood Mountain stalker is awake. Someone disturbed the old places. Someone who shouldn't have." "Grandmother, what are you talking about?" "There are things that guard our sacred places, Samuel. Things that were once men but chose to become something else to protect what's holy. They sleep until the sacred places are threatened. Then they wake up, hungry and angry." I wanted to argue, to tell her it was just a bear or maybe someone in a costume playing tricks. But I kept thinking about those human eyes in that bear's face. How do you stop something like that? You don't stop it, grandson. You appease it. You make things right again. The next morning brought the state police, the FBI, and more reporters than I'd ever seen in one place. Word had gotten out about the missing hikers, and everyone wanted answers I didn't have. Special Agent Martinez from the FBI took charge of the investigation. He was a city man in an expensive suit who clearly thought he was dealing with some hillbilly rangers who'd never seen a real crime scene. "Probably a serial killer using the wilderness to hide bodies," he said, looking at photos of the destroyed campsites. "Maybe someone with a trained bear or large dog." I kept my mouth shut about what I'd seen. Who would believe it? Janice and I were assigned to guide a full search team back to the clearing. 25 people with rifles, dogs, and enough firepower to stop a small army. I should have felt safer. Instead, I felt like we were walking into a trap. The dogs started acting strange as soon as we got close to the mountain. They whined and pulled backward on their leashes, refusing to follow the scent trail. Even the most experienced tracking dogs wouldn't go past a certain point. "Never seen anything like it," said Handler Stevens, who'd worked with police dogs for 15 years. "It's like they're scared of something up ahead." We found the clearing, but it was different now. The bones were gone, the backpacks were gone. Even the smell was different, or cleaner, like rain had washed it. But there had been no rain for weeks. Agent Martinez was not happy. "Someone's been tampering with evidence. Probably your serial killer covering his tracks." But I noticed something else. New marks on the trees around the clearing. The same claw symbols I'd seen before, but more of them, like a message written in a language I couldn't read. That afternoon, while the FBI team was setting up base camp, I hiked to the Cherokee burial mounds about 2 miles north of the clearing. My grandmother had told me they were there, hidden in a grove of old oak trees that the Cherokee considered sacred. What I found made my stomach drop. The burial mounds had been dug up. Recently. There were shovels and brushes scattered around, and several holes had been carefully excavated. A sign posted nearby read, "University of Georgia Archaeological Survey, Dr. Patricia Hensley, Department of Anthropology." Someone had been digging up Cherokee graves. I radioed back to base camp and told Agent Martinez what I'd found. 20 minutes later, Dr. Hensley arrived with 2 graduate students. She was a thin woman in her 50s with graying hair and dirt under her fingernails. "We have all the proper permits," she said defensively. "This is legitimate scientific research." "When did you start digging?" I asked. 3 weeks ago. We're documenting Cherokee burial practices from the 1700s. It's important historical work." 3 weeks. Right around the time the first hikers went missing. That night, the thing came to our base camp. I was on watch duty around 2 in the morning when I heard it. That same low growling that turned into almost words. It was circling our camp, staying just outside the light from our campfire. I woke Agent Martinez and the others. We all grabbed our guns and formed a circle, backs to the fire, facing out into the darkness. "Federal agents," Martinez shouted, "come out with your hands up." The growling stopped. For maybe 30 seconds, the forest was completely silent. Then it laughed. Not a human laugh, something deeper and wilder. But there was intelligence in it, like it understood what Martinez had said and found it funny. "Jesus Christ," whispered one of the state troopers. "What is that thing?" Branches cracked as something huge moved through the trees around us. We could hear it, but couldn't see it. Our flashlights showed nothing but trees and darkness. Then, from directly above us, a voice spoke. Deep and rough, but clearly words. "Go. Away. From sacred places." We all looked up, but the thing was gone. The next morning we found massive footprints in the soft dirt around our camp. They started at the edge of the firelight and circled our tents 3 times. Then they just stopped, like whatever made them had vanished into thin air. Dr. Hensley's graduate students packed up and left that day, said they didn't sign up for this kind of danger. Dr. Hensley herself looked pale and shaken, but insisted on continuing her work. "I'm not going to let some local folklore scare me away from legitimate science," she said. That was her first mistake. Her last mistake was going back to the burial mounds alone that evening to collect more artifacts. We found her the next morning, what was left of her. The thing had arranged her bones in a pattern around the largest burial mound, like it was sending a message. Her skull sat on top of the mound, facing toward our base camp. And carved into the old oak tree above it were fresh symbols, the same claw marks we'd been seeing everywhere. Janice threw up when she saw it. Agent Martinez called for backup and air support, but I understood what I was looking at. It wasn't random violence. It was justice, Cherokee style. Someone had desecrated sacred ground, and the guardian of that ground had woken up to set things right. That night, I called my grandmother one more time. "It's getting stronger," I told her. "More people are going to die." "Not if you do what needs to be done, Samuel." You know the old ways. Your grandmother taught you before she passed. I don't remember enough. I was just a kid during those ceremonies. Then you better remember fast, grandson, because that thing isn't going to stop until the sacred places are protected again, and it doesn't care how many people it has to kill to make that happen. The FBI brought in helicopters and thermal imaging equipment. They set up a perimeter around Blood Mountain and declared it a federal crime scene. Agent Martinez was convinced we were dealing with a domestic terrorist using psychological warfare tactics. But I knew better now, and I knew it was going to come for me next. You see, I'd been part of Dr. Hensley's archaeological survey. Not officially. She'd asked me about Cherokee burial sites 3 weeks ago, and I'd told her where to find the mounds. I thought it was legitimate research. I thought it would help preserve Cherokee history. Instead, I'd helped someone desecrate the graves of my ancestors. The thing knew. It had been watching, waiting, deciding how to punish everyone involved. Dr. Hensley was dead. The hikers who'd camped near the burial mounds were dead. And I was the ranger who'd given directions to the sacred places. I was next on its list. That afternoon, I left base camp and hiked alone to the burial mounds. I needed to see them for myself, to understand what we'd awakened. The site looked different now. The excavation holes had been filled in, like giant hands had pushed the dirt back where it belonged. The scattered bones and artifacts had been reburied. Even the grass was growing back. But in the center of the largest mound sat a skull. Not Dr. Hensley's. This one was old, maybe centuries old. And around it, stuck in the ground in a perfect circle, were 7 eagle feathers. I knew what I was looking at. A Cherokee shaman's grave. A medicine man's final resting pool. Lace. And we dug him up. The sun was setting when I heard the footsteps behind me. Heavy, deliberate steps that crunched through the dry leaves. I turned around slowly. It stood at the edge of the tree line, maybe 30 feet away. In the fading light, I could see it clearly for the first time. 10 feet tall, covered in dark hair, but wearing the tattered remains of Cherokee warrior clothing. Leather breechcloth, bone jewelry, war paint that looked like it was made from blood. Its face was a nightmare mixture of bear and human, a bear's snout and teeth, but human eyes that burned with intelligence and rage. When it spoke, its voice sounded like rocks grinding together. You helped them dig. I couldn't run. My legs wouldn't move. All I could do was stand there and stare at this impossible thing that had once been a man. I didn't know, I said. I thought it was to preserve Cherokee history. It took a step closer, then another. Sacred places. Not for digging. Not for taking. Now I could smell it. Death and earth and old smoke. Like a ceremonial fire that had been burning for hundreds of years. You're the shaman, I said. The medicine man buried here. Its lips pulled back in what might have been a smile, showing teeth like broken glass. Chosen to guard forever became this, to protect. I understood then. This had once been a Cherokee shaman who'd volunteered to become something else, something more than human, to guard the sacred burial places from desecration. He'd transformed himself into this creature, given up his humanity to protect what was holy, and we'd woken him up by digging up his grave. What do you want? I asked. Sacred places returned to earth. No more digging. No more taking. It raised one massive hand. Claws the size of hunting knives caught the last light of the setting sun. Payment for desecration. I should have run. Should have tried to fight. Instead, I did something my grandmother had taught me when I was 7 years old. I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out my tobacco pouch. Real tobacco, grown the traditional way by Cherokee farmers on the reservation. The creature stopped moving. I opened the pouch and took out a pinch of tobacco. Held it up to the 4 directions, north, south, east, west, the way my grandmother had shown me. Then I placed it on the ground at my feet. "I offer tobacco to the guardian of the sacred places," I said in Cherokee. The words came back to me from ceremonies I'd attended as a child. "I ask forgiveness for the desecration. I promise the graves will be protected." The creature stared at me for a long moment. Then it threw back its head and howled, a sound that was part human scream, part animal roar. Birds exploded from the trees. In the distance, I could hear the FBI search team shouting in panic. When I looked back, the creature was changing. Its form seemed to shimmer in the twilight, becoming less solid, more like smoke. The bare features faded, and for just a moment, I saw the face of an old Cherokee man with kind eyes and deep lines around his mouth. "Guard them better," it whispered. Then it was gone. I stood there in the gathering darkness, holding my empty tobacco pouch, wondering if anyone would believe what had just happened. The next morning, Agent Martinez found me sitting by the burial mounds. I told him I'd fallen asleep on watch duty. He wasn't happy, but he had bigger problems. 3 more of his agents had disappeared during the night, and their equipment was found hanging from tree branches 30 feet in the air. "We're pulling back," he said. "This case is beyond federal jurisdiction." I nodded. I could have told him what really happened, but he wouldn't have believed it anyway. The FBI officially closed the case a month later. 7 hikers and 1 archaeologist killed by an unknown large predator, probably a rogue Beals, bear. The Blood Mountain Wilderness area was temporarily closed to the public for wildlife management purposes. Dr. Hensley's archaeological dig was shut down permanently. The university said it was out of respect for the victims, but I knew the real reason. The Cherokee Nation had filed an injunction to protect the burial sites, and no one wanted to fight that battle in court. I requested a transfer to permanent duty on Blood Mountain. My job now was to make sure no one disturbed the sacred places again. The Cherokee Tribal Council officially thanked me for protecting their ancestors' graves, though they never asked how I'd done it. My wife Sarah noticed the scars on my back where the creature's claws had barely missed my spine. I told her I'd fallen against a barbed wire fence during the search operation. She didn't believe me, but she didn't push for the truth either. Some things are better left alone. Janice Parks transferred to a desk job in Atlanta. She never talked about what we'd seen up there, but sometimes when we'd run into each other at ranger meetings, I'd catch her looking over her shoulder, like she was expecting something to follow her home. The scars on my back burn sometimes, usually during the full moon or when I hear stories about people disturbing Cherokee sites in other parts of Georgia. My grandmother always said the spirits were connected, that they communicated in ways we couldn't understand. I think she was right. 3 months after the Blood Mountain incident, a construction crew in North Georgia found human remains while building a new shopping mall. Cherokee remains, over 200 years old. The developer wanted to move the bones to a museum and keep building. That night, my scars burned so hot I couldn't sleep. And the next morning, the construction foreman was found dead in his trailer, torn apart by something with claws. The shopping mall was never built. There have been other incidents over the years, always the same pattern. Someone disturbs Cherokee sacred sites, and something ancient and angry wakes up to protect them. The newspapers call them animal attacks or serial killer cases, but I know better. There's a whole network of guardians out there, sleeping until they're needed, Cherokee warriors who gave up their humanity to protect what's sacred. And they're still watching, still waiting. I'm 63 now, getting ready to retire. But before I do, I need to pass on what I've learned to the next generation of rangers. Someone needs to know the truth about the guardians, about what happens when sacred places are threatened. Someone needs to make sure the old agreements are kept, because every Cherokee burial ground, every sacred site, every place where our ancestors rest has a guardian. And if you wake them up, if you disturb what they're protecting, they won't stop until things are made right again. The Blood Mountain Stalker is still up there. I see its tracks sometimes after heavy rains, circles around the burial mounds where Dr. Hensley dug her holes, making sure everything stays where it belongs. And on quiet nights when the moon is full, You can still hear chanting coming from the sacred places on Blood Mountain. The voices of Cherokee ancestors singing the old songs, keeping the old ways alive. The Guardian is listening to those songs, waiting, ready to wake up again if anyone is foolish enough to disturb the sacred places where the Cherokee dead rest in peace. Don't be that person. Some things are better left alone. My name is Robert Whitman, but everyone calls me Bobby. I've been a park ranger for 16 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything the wilderness could throw at me. Bears, mountain lions, flash floods, hypothermia cases, you name it, I've handled it. But what happened in the Great Smoky Mountains that September changed everything I thought I knew about the world. I transferred to the Smokies in 1985 after my divorce. My ex-wife Linda got tired of me being gone for weeks at a time on search and rescue missions out west. Can't say I blame her. The mountains were always more like home to me than any house ever was. The deal we worked out was simple. I'd take a job closer to Knoxville so our daughter Sarah could spend summers with me. She was 14 then, old enough to appreciate the mountains, but young enough to still think her old man was pretty cool. The Smokies were different from the western parks I knew. These mountains were older, softer somehow, covered in that thick green blanket of forest that made you feel like you were walking through a living cathedral. The Cherokee had lived here for thousands of years before the white settlers came, and sometimes, especially in the early morning mist, you could almost feel that ancient presence watching from the trees. My specialty was missing persons recovery. I had a gift for reading sign, broken twigs, disturbed leaves, the way someone walked when they were lost versus when they knew where they were going. In 16 years, I'd found everyone I went looking for. Sometimes they were alive, sometimes not. But I always found them. That was my reputation. And I was proud of it. The Cataract Falls area was my regular patrol zone. It's a beautiful stretch of the park where Abrams Creek cuts through some of the deepest forest in the Smokies. The valleys there hold morning fog, like cupped hands hold water. Most days, you'd have thick mist until about 10 in the morning, then it would burn off as the sun got higher. That's just how weather works in mountain country. Cold air settles in the valleys overnight, warm air rises, and you get fog. Simple physics. At least that's what I used to think. The first sign something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning in mid-September. I was driving my patrol truck down the winding road toward the trailhead when I got the call. Dispatch said the Hendersons, a family of 4 from Atlanta, had been reported missing by other campers. They'd gone for a day hike Monday morning and never came back to their campsite. Last seen heading toward Cataract Falls, the dispatcher told me. Weather was clear when they left. I grabbed my pack and headed up the trail. The morning was crisp and bright, not a cloud in the sky. Perfect hiking weather. But as I got deeper into the forest, I noticed something odd. There was fog hanging in pockets between the trees, thick white patches that seemed to ignore the sunshine filtering down through the leaves. Now, I'm not one for superstition. Fog doesn't think. It just follows weather patterns. But this fog felt different somehow. It clung to certain spots like it belonged there, like it had business being there, even when all the conditions said it should be gone. I found their campsite first, coffee still in the pot, sleeping bags laid out neat and tidy. Whatever happened to the Hendersons, they'd expected to come back that day. Their car keys were still hanging on a hook inside their tent. The trail to Cataract Falls is well marked and not particularly difficult. The Hendersons were experienced hikers according to their camping permit. They wouldn't have gotten lost on a clear day on a trail they could practically follow with their eyes closed. But as I followed their route, the fog got thicker and stranger. The fog shouldn't have been there at all. It was past noon, the sun was bright overhead, and there was a steady breeze moving through the trees. But the deeper I went into the valley, the thicker the mist became until I was walking through walls of white so dense I could barely see my own feet. I pulled out my compass and stopped dead. The needle was spinning lazily in circles like it couldn't decide which way was north. I tapped it, shook it, held it level. Nothing. The thing just kept spinning. That's when I tried my radio. "Base, this is Whitman. I'm about 2 miles up the Cataract Falls Trail following signs of the missing family. I've got some unusual weather conditions down here." Static. Then something else. My own voice, distant and hollow, repeating the same words back to me like an echo bouncing off canyon walls. But there were no canyon walls here, just trees and fog. I tried the radio again. "Base, do you copy?" This time I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was my voice again, but saying words I hadn't spoken. "Help me. I can't find my way out. The fog won't let me go." I clicked off the radio and stood there listening to the silence. Even the normal forest sounds seemed muted, like the fog was swallowing everything. Bird calls, wind through the leaves, even my own breathing. That's when I heard the voices. "Help!" A man's voice, distant but clear, coming from somewhere ahead of me on the trail. "Is someone there? We're lost." I moved toward the sound, pushing through fog so thick it was like walking through wet cotton. "This is Park Ranger Whitman," I called out. "Keep talking so I can find you." "Over here." A woman's voice this time, but it seemed to be coming from a completely different direction. "Please, our children are scared." I turned toward the woman's voice, but now the man was calling from behind me. "Don't leave us. We can hear you walking away." But I wasn't walking away. I was standing perfectly still. I pulled out my emergency whistle and gave it 3 sharp blasts. The standard signal for help is here. The sound seemed to be swallowed by the fog before it could travel more than a few feet. But then, impossibly, I heard the whistle blowing back at me from at least 6 different directions, like the fog itself was playing my signal back to me. That's when I saw the footprints. They were clear in the soft earth beside the trail, hiking boot prints, the right size and tread pattern to match what the Henderson family would be wearing. But these prints didn't follow the trail. They wandered in circles, crossed back over themselves, led off into the dense forest, and then returned to the same spot. I followed them with my flashlight, even though it was the middle of the day. The beam seemed to die after just a few feet, swallowed by the white void around me. The footprints led me in a circle about 20 feet across. At the center of the circle, the earth was disturbed like someone had been digging or thrashing around. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when I looked down and saw my own boot prints mixed in with the others. Fresh prints, still sharp-edged in the damp soil. Prints I didn't remember making. I looked at my watch. It was 4:17 p.m. That couldn't be right. I'd entered the fog around noon, and I'd only been walking for what felt like 20 or 30 minutes. But my watch had never been wrong before, and when I checked my backup timepiece, it showed the same thing. I'd lost over 4 hours, and I had no memory of where they'd gone. The voices started up again, closer now. "Ranger Whitman, we can see your light. Don't go away." But when I turned toward the voice, there was nothing there but more fog. And now I realized something that made my skin crawl. The voice calling my name sounded exactly like my own. I had to get out of there. Whatever was happening in that fog bank, it wasn't natural and it wasn't safe. I turned what I thought was back toward the trail, but after 10 minutes of walking, I was still surrounded by white. My compass was still spinning uselessly, and my GPS unit was showing impossible coordinates, numbers that would have put me somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Then I heard something that stopped me cold. It was my daughter Sarah's voice, thin and frightened, calling from somewhere in the white void around me. "Daddy, help me. I'm lost and scared. I can't find my way back." But Sarah was in school in Knoxville, 200 miles away. She couldn't be here. "Sarah?" I called out, hating myself for falling for whatever trick this was. "Sarah, where are you?" "I followed you into the fog, Daddy. Now I can't get out. Please don't leave me here." The voice was moving, circling around me in the mist. I spun in place, trying to follow it, my heart pounding against my ribs. Even knowing it couldn't really be her, I couldn't help myself. What if somehow she had come looking for me? What if she was really trapped in here? "Keep talking, baby," I called. "Daddy's coming." But as I moved toward her voice, I stepped on something that crunched under my boot. I looked down and saw bones. old yellowed bones scattered in the leaves. And there were more of them, forming a rough circle around a clear space in the fog. In that clear space I could see shapes moving, tall, shifting figures that looked almost human, but not quite right. They moved like smoke given form, and when they turned toward me I saw faces I recognized. The Henderson family, all four of them standing there in the fog, looking at me with empty eye sockets. The parents held the hands of their two children, and all of them were reaching toward me with their free hands. "Join us," Mr. Henderson said, though his mouth didn't move. "The fog is so comfortable. You'll never be lost again." I stumbled backward, crashing through the underbrush, branches tearing at my clothes and face. The Henderson family followed me, moving through the trees like they were made of mist themselves. Their voices echoed from all directions now, no longer pleading for help but whispering promises. "Stay with us, Ranger Whitman. The fog will take care of you. No more searching for lost people. You can rest now. Sarah is waiting for you. She's already here." I ran blindly through the white void, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across trees that appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Behind me I could hear them following. Not footsteps exactly, but a sound like wind through leaves, getting closer. My radio crackled to life. "Bobby, this is Patricia. Where are you? Your truck's been sitting empty at the trailhead for 6 hours. Patricia Quinn was another ranger, one of the few people in the park I trusted completely. We'd worked several search and rescue operations together, and she was as steady and reliable as they came. Hearing her voice was like grabbing a lifeline. "Patricia!" I gasped into the radio. "I'm trapped in some kind of fog bank. The Henderson family. They're dead, but they're still here. The fog won't let me leave." Static then. "Bobby, I don't know what you're talking about. There's no fog anywhere in the park today. It's been clear and sunny all afternoon." That stopped me cold. I looked around at the thick white mist surrounding me, so dense I could barely see my own hands. "Patricia, I'm telling you, I'm in the middle of a fog bank so thick I can't see 3 feet in any direction. Bobby, I'm looking right at the valley from Lookout Point. There's no fog. The whole area is clear." But even as she spoke, I could see shapes moving in the mist around me. More figures now, not just the Henderson family. An elderly man in hiking gear, a young couple holding hands, 2 teenage boys with backpacks. All of them had that same empty-eyed look, and all of them were reaching toward me. "You belong here," they whispered in unison. "You've always belonged here. Stop fighting." I keyed Taz. He radio again. "Patricia, I need you to stay away from Cataract Falls. Something's wrong here. Something that's not natural." "I'm already on my way, Bobby. Just keep talking so I can track. Your signal." "No, don't come down here. Whatever you do, don't enter the fog." But it was too late. Through the mist ahead of me, I saw a flashlight beam cutting through the white. Patricia's voice came from that direction, close and getting closer. "Bobby? I can see your light. What fog are you talking about? I'm walking in clear." Her voice cut off with a sharp gasp. The flashlight beam wavered, then steadied. "Oh, God," she whispered into the radio. "Bobby, what is this place?" The fog had her too. I fought my way through the mist toward her light, pushing past the reaching figures that tried to block my path. When I found her, Patricia was standing perfectly still, staring up at something I couldn't see. Her face was pale, and her eyes had that distant look I'd seen on the faces of people in shock. "Patricia, we have to get out of here. Now." She turned to look at me, but her expression was strange, like she was seeing me from a great distance. "Bobby, how long have we been partners?" "What?" "Patricia, we need to focus. We need to find a way out of—" "How long?" she insisted. 3 years, maybe 4. "Patricia, what does that matter?" "I've been walking in this fog for 3 years, she said quietly. "Calling your name, looking for you, but you were never there." The figures in the mist moved closer. I could see dozens of them now, maybe hundreds, men, women, children, all with that same empty-eyed stare, all reaching toward us with pale, translucent hands. And in the center of them all, something else was taking shape. Something tall and shifting, made of fog and shadow and malice. It had almost human features that kept changing, reforming themselves like smoke in the wind. When it spoke, its voice was like the sound of wind through dead leaves. I am the keeper of the thin place, it said, the guardian of the boundary between your world and the Nightland. These people wandered too far from the safe paths. Now they serve me, and you will too. The thing that had been Patricia stepped closer to me. It's not so bad, Bobby. You don't have to search anymore. You don't have to lose people. Everyone you've ever looked for is here. I backed away from her, from all of them. You're not Patricia. Patricia wouldn't give up. She'd fight. I am Patricia, she said sadly. I'm just tired of fighting. Aren't you tired too? The fog creature laughed, a sound like branches breaking in a storm. She came looking for you, Ranger Whitman, just as you came looking for the lost family. Just as they came looking for their missing son, who wandered off the trail last month. The fog calls to those who search, and it never lets them go. More shapes were moving in the mist now. I recognized some of them from missing person reports over the years, cases that had gone cold, people who had simply vanished without a trace in the mountains. They were all here, trapped in this pocket of nowhere between the living world and whatever lay beyond. Join us willingly, the fog creature continued, and the transition will be peaceful. Fight, and you'll wander lost in the mist forever, calling for help that will never come. I looked at Patricia, at the Henderson family, at all the lost souls surrounding me. They seemed content enough in their empty-eyed way. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad. Maybe it would be a relief to stop searching, stop losing people, stop carrying the weight of all those failures. But then I heard something that changed everything. A helicopter. The steady thrum of rotors cutting through the air somewhere far above the fog. And a voice on my radio. Not Patricia's voice, but the real Patricia, calling from somewhere outside this nightmare. Bobby, if you can hear me, the chopper's inbound with a medical team. We're going to get you out of the hurt. The fog creature's features twisted with rage. She lies. There is no outside. There is only the mist and the thin place and the eternal search. But I could hear the helicopter, getting closer, and I could feel something the fog people couldn't. Hope. You're wrong, I told the creature. There is an outside, and I'm going back to it. The fog creature towered over me, its form shifting and writhing like smoke in a hurricane. You cannot leave. You have seen too much, know too much. The boundary must be protected. Protected from what? I demanded, backing away from the reaching hands of the lost souls. You're the one doing the killing here. I kill no one, the creature hissed. I simply collect those who stray too far from the safe paths, those who ignore the warnings, who think they know better than the ancient wisdom. The Cherokee understood. This valley is a doorway, a place where the world of the living touches the Nightland. I guard that door. The helicopter sound was getting louder now, but the fog seemed to be thickening in response, pressing down like a heavy blanket. Through my radio, I could hear Patricia, the real Patricia, coordinating the rescue effort. We've got his GPS coordinates locked in. Thermal imaging shows a large warm mass about 50 yards north of the creek bend. But there's something strange. The infrared is showing a massive cold spot right around his position. The fog creature laughed. Your technology cannot penetrate the thin place. Your rescuers will find nothing but empty forest. But even as it spoke, I felt a change in the air pressure. The helicopter was directly overhead now, and the downdraft from its rotors was starting to disturb the fog. Thin tendrils of mist began to swirl and dissipate. The lost souls around me suddenly looked panicked. They pressed closer, grabbing at my clothes and equipment. Don't leave us, Patricia's fog double pleaded. If the mist goes away, we'll have nowhere to exist. We'll be truly dead. The fog creature roared with fury as more of the mist was blown away by the helicopter's rotors. I will not be denied. You will stay, or I will drag your world into the Nightland. The ground beneath my feet began to shift and change. Where there had been forest floor, now I could see through to somewhere else. a dark, twisted landscape under a starless sky. The Nightland, the place where the dead things waited. And rising up from that dark realm, I saw more fog creatures, dozens of them, reaching upward toward our world. "The boundary is weakening," the first creature said, its voice now desperate rather than commanding. "Too many have crossed over. Too many doors have been opened. If I cannot keep you here to strengthen the barrier, then the barrier must fall completely." I understood then. This wasn't just about collecting lost hikers. The fog creature was trying to maintain some kind of balance, keeping the world of the dead from spilling over into the world of the living. But something had gone wrong. Maybe too many people had died here. Maybe the boundary was naturally weakening. Whatever the case, the creature's solution was to trap people in the fog, using their life force to reinforce the barrier between worlds. But that solution was killing innocent people. The helicopter's downdraft was creating a clear space around me now, pushing back the fog and revealing the normal forest beyond. Through the trees, I could see Patricia, the real Patricia, rappelling down from the chopper with a rescue harness. "Bobby," she called, "grab the line." But as I reached for the rescue line, the ground beneath my feet gave way completely. I found myself falling through the weakened boundary between worlds, tumbling down into the cold darkness of the Nightland. The fog creature fell with me, its form becoming more solid and terrifying as we entered its native realm. We landed hard on black stone that felt like ice. Above us, I could see the open, back to the living world, with Patricia's worried face framed in the gap. But between us and escape, dozens of fog creatures were rising from the shadows, all of them focused on me. "You have brought the weakness with you," the first creature said. "Now you will see what happens when the boundary fails completely." The creatures began to flow upward toward the opening, ready to spill into the living world and claim it for the Nightland. I could see Patricia at the edge of the gap, trying to throw me another line, not understanding that she was about to be overrun by an army of the dead. But then I remembered something my Cherokee friend Joe Crowfeather had told me once, back when I first came to work in the Smokies. "The old places have their own rules," he'd said. "Respect them, and they'll protect you. Fight them, and they'll destroy you. But if you can find the balance, sometimes you can work with them." Balance. That was the key. "Wait!" I shouted to the fog creature. "You don't have to choose between trapping people and letting the boundary fail. There's a third option." The creature paused, its glowing eyes fixed on me. "What option?" "The boundary weakens with every death and strengthens with every soul I claim. There is no middle path." "Yes, there is," I said, pulling out my park ranger badge. "Let me help you. Let me be the guardian on the living side. I'll keep people away from the dangerous areas, mark the thin places, warn them about the fog. You won't need to trap anyone if no one gets lost in the first place." The creature considered this. Around us, the other fog beings waited in silence. "You would become my partner in protecting the boundary? Warning the living away from the places where they might accidentally cross over?" "Yes," I said. "But you have to let the people you've already trapped go free. All of them. They didn't choose to be here, and keeping them is making the boundary weaker, not stronger." Above us, Patricia was shouting something about the fog dissipating, about being able to see into some kind of cavern, the helicopter. Her pilot was trying to hold position despite the strange thermals rising from the opening between worlds. The fog creature looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "It is acceptable. But know this, guardian of the living side. If you fail in your duties, if people continue to cross over despite your warnings, the old way will return. I will claim them all." "Understood," I said. "Now let them go." The creature raised its arms, and throughout the Nightland, I heard voices crying out in relief and joy. The lost souls were being released, sent back to whatever afterlife waited for them beyond this in-between place. I saw the Henderson family waving goodbye as they faded into light, finally free to move on. Above us, the opening back to the living world began to close, but slowly enough for me to climb the rescue line Patricia had lowered. As I hauled myself up toward the light, the fog creature called after me. Remember your promise, Guardian. The thin places must be protected. I won't forget, I called back. And I meant it. The official report said I'd fallen into a sinkhole that had opened up during the heavy rains the week before. The fog was explained as a temperature inversion caused by cold air trapped in the underground cavern. Patricia backed up my story, though I could see in her eyes that she knew there was more to it than that. We found the Henderson family's bodies at the bottom of the sinkhole, along with the remains of 6 other missing persons from the past decade. All of them showed signs of hypothermia and dehydration, which fit the official story. What the report didn't mention was that they all looked peaceful, like they'd simply laid down to sleep. I spent 3 days in the hospital being treated for exposure and a mild concussion. While I was there, I had a visitor, Joe Crowfeather, the Cherokee elder I'd met when I first came to the Smokies. He sat quietly beside my bed for a long time before speaking. The old people called it the Nightland Walker, he said finally. A guardian spirit that keeps the world of the dead from bleeding into the world of the living. My grandmother said her grandfather once made a deal with it, back when the first white settlers started getting lost in the deep valleys. What kind of deal? I asked. To be its eyes and voice on this side, to warn people away from the thin places, to keep the boundary strong. He looked at me with dark, knowing eyes. Sounds familiar? I nodded. What happened to him, the first guardian? He lived to be very old, older than he should have been, but he was never quite the same after he made the bargain. Sometimes people saw him talking to the fog on misty mornings. Sometimes he knew things about people that he shouldn't have known, like where they'd been, what they'd lost, what they were looking for. After I got out of the hospital, I went back to work. But everything was different now. I could feel the thin places in the mountains, sense when the boundary between worlds was weakening. On foggy mornings, especially around Cataract Falls, I could hear whispers in the mist. Not threatening now, but informative. Warnings about hikers who were straying too far from safe paths, alerts about people who were getting lost or injured. I started posting new warning signs around the most dangerous areas. Extreme fog danger. Do not enter during weather advisories. Most people heeded the warnings. Those who didn't, well, I usually managed to find them before they wandered too far into the mist. Usually. Sarah came to visit that Christmas, and she noticed the change in me right away. "Dad, you seem different," she said as we sat by the fire in my cabin. "More serious, like you're listening for something all the time." "Just doing my job, sweetheart," I told her, "keeping people safe." But that night, as fog rolled through the valleys outside my window, I heard the whispers again. And sometimes, just sometimes, I thought I could see familiar faces in the mist. The Henderson family, other lost souls I'd helped find over the years. They weren't trapped anymore, but they seemed to be checking on me, making sure I was keeping my end of the bargain. The fog bank at Cataract Falls still appears on certain mornings, but now it stays in specific areas, bounded by the warning signs I've posted over the years. Other rangers have reported similar phenomena at different locations throughout the park: Cades Cove, Elkmont, the Chimney Tops. Places where the Cherokee knew the veil between worlds was thin. I've been the guardian for 38 years now, and I'm getting old. Sometimes I wonder what will happen when I can't do the job anymore. Will the Nightland Walker find a new partner, or will it go back to the old ways of claiming the lost? I've been training Patricia to recognize the signs, though she doesn't know it yet. She has the right instincts, the ability to sense when something's not quite right, the dedication to keep searching, even when others give up hope. Maybe one day she'll be ready to make her own bargain with the fog. Until then, I keep watch. I post the signs, I heed the warnings whispered in the mist, and I make sure the boundary between worlds stays strong. Most days, it's enough. But on foggy mornings when the veil is thin and the whispers are loud, I sometimes catch myself wondering, what would have happened if I'd stayed in the Nightland that day? Would it really have been so bad to stop searching, stop losing people, stop carrying the weight of all those responsibilities? Then I remember Sarah's laugh, Patricia's steady competence, the faces of all the people I've helped find their way home over the years. The living world, for all its pain and uncertainty, is still worth protecting, even if the price is listening to voices in the fog for the rest of my life. The warning signs are still there for those smart enough to read them. But every year, someone ignores the warnings. Every year, someone thinks they know better than the ancient wisdom. And every year, I have to hope I can reach them before the fog does. My name is Eugene Thatcher, but everyone calls me Gene. I've been a forest ranger for 17 years now, walking these West Virginia mountains since I was 27 years old. Back then, I was supposed to be a coal miner like my daddy and his daddy before him. That was the plan until the doctors told me my lungs were already showing black spots. Amazing how fast you can change your whole life when someone tells you the air underground might kill you. So I traded the coal dust for pine needles, and I never looked back. Well, almost never. Sometimes when I'm deep in the caves doing rescue work, I can still taste that metallic tang in the air that reminds me of the mines. But caves are different. Caves are honest. They don't pretend to be safe when they're not. It was late October 1969 when everything changed. The first frost warnings were coming in over the radio, and fog was starting to settle in the hollows like it does every year around this time. I was at the ranger station, filling out paperwork about some hikers who'd gotten lost near Seneca Rocks when the call came in. "Gene, we got a problem." It was Sheriff Morrison from the county office. His voice sounded tight. "Got 6 college kids missing from some spelunking club. Virginia Tech students. Been 3 days now." I set down my coffee mug. 3 days was bad. Real bad. Where were they headed? Devil's Throat Cave System. Parents are driving down from Blacksburg scared out of their minds. I knew Devil's Throat well. It was a tricky system, lots of narrow passages and dead ends. But it wasn't supposed to be dangerous if you knew what you were doing. College kids usually did their homework before tackling caves like that. "I'll head out there now," I told Morrison. "Radio dead zone starts about 2 miles in, so if you don't hear from me by midnight, send backup." The drive to Devil's Throat took 40 minutes, in utes on winding mountain roads. When I got there, I could see their cars parked at the trailhead, 2 beat-up Volkswagen Bugs with Virginia plates. Someone had left a cooler on one of the picnic tables, and it was still half full of sandwiches and beer. The bread was getting moldy. I grabbed my gear from the truck: headlamp, extra batteries, rope, first aid kit, emergency flares. After 17 years, I could pack a rescue kit in my sleep. The October air was crisp and clean, with that smell of dying leaves that always makes me think of my daughter. She used to collect the red ones when she was little, before she went to live with her aunt in Charleston after her mother passed. The trail to the cave entrance was easy enough, well marked and maintained by the Forestry Service. But as I got closer, something felt off. The woods were too quiet. No bird calls, no squirrels chattering. Even the insects seemed to have gone silent. In 17 years of walking these mountains, I'd learned to trust my gut when something didn't feel right. The cave entrance was a narrow crack in the limestone, maybe 4 feet wide and 6 feet tall. Someone had hung a sign years ago: Devil's Throat Cave System, experienced cavers only. The college kids' gear was scattered around the opening: backpacks, water bottles, extra rope. But no signs of a struggle or panic. It looked like they'd just set everything down and walked in. I checked their rope first. Standard climbing rope, good quality, properly knotted to a sturdy oak tree about 10 feet from the entrance. But when I pulled it up, my blood went cold. The end was cut clean through. Not frayed like it would be if it had rubbed against rock or stretched and snapped under weight. Cut. Like someone had taken a sharp knife to it. I played my headlamp around the cave entrance, looking for any other signs of what might have happened, though. That's when I noticed the scratches in the stone around the opening, deep gouges like claw marks, but bigger than any animal I knew. They looked fresh. I'd been telling people for years that there was no such thing as cave demons, just bad air and darker thoughts. Caves played tricks on your mind, made you see and hear things that weren't there, made rational people panic and do stupid things. But standing there in the growing dusk, looking at that cut rope and those strange marks in the stone, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Something that reminded me of being a kid, walking past the old graveyard on my way to school, sure that something was watching me from behind the crooked headstones. I was scared. The thing about caves is that they have their own rules. Temperature drops as you go deeper. Sound changes. Your voice gets swallowed up or thrown back at you in strange ways. Your headlamp beam seems to get weaker, even with fresh batteries. After 17 years of cave rescues, I knew what to expect. But Devil's Throat wasn't playing by the rules. I'd been following the main passage for about 20 minutes when I first noticed the temperature was wrong. Instead of getting cooler as I went deeper, it was getting warmer. Not by much, but enough that I started to sweat under my jacket. I stopped and checked my thermometer. 68 degrees. It should have been closer to 50 down here. The passage ahead curved to the right, and I could see where the college kids had gone. Footprints in the muddy cave floor, 6 sets moving together. They were being careful, staying in single file like they'd been taught. Good kids, smart kids. So where were they? That's when I heard the first sound that didn't belong. It was like whispering, but not quite. Like voices talking very quietly in another room, just at the edge of hearing. I stopped walking and listened hard. The sounds seemed to be coming from deeper in the cave, but also from behind me, and from the walls themselves. I'd heard cave acoustics do weird things before, sound bouncing off rock formations, creating echoes that seemed to come from impossible directions. But this was different. This sounded like actual voices, speaking words I almost but not quite understood. I kept walking. The passage split into 2 branches ahead. The college kids' footprints went to the right, toward what my map showed as a series of small chambers. I was about to follow them when I saw the first blood drops. They were fresh, dark red spots on the pale limestone floor leading toward the left branch where the footprints didn't go. I knelt down and touched one with my glove. Still wet. My radio crackled with static. I tried calling back to the ranger station but got nothing except white noise. That was normal for this depth, but it still made me feel more alone. I decided to follow the blood trail first. If one of the kids was hurt and had wandered off, they might need immediate help. The left passage was narrower than the main tunnel, maybe 3 feet wide. I had to turn sideways in places to squeeze through. The blood drops continued for about 50 yards, then stopped. But the passage kept going, sloping downward into darkness that seemed thicker than it should be. I played my headlamp beam ahead and saw something that made me stop cold. The cave walls were covered with scratches, not random gouges like you'd see from water erosion or animal claws. These looked deliberate, purposeful, like writing but in no language I'd ever seen. The symbols were deep, carved into the limestone with something sharp and strong, and they were definitely not ancient. Some of them still had white stone dust around the edges. I heard the whispering again, louder this time, and now I could almost make out words. They sounded like Cherokee, the native language I'd heard spoken by some of the older folks in town. My grandmother used to tell stories about the Cherokee who lived in these mountains before the white settlers came. Stories about sacred places that should never be disturbed. "Ain't no such thing as cave demons," I said out loud, just to hear my own voice. But it came out as more of a whisper. I backed out of the narrow passage and returned to follow the college kids' trail. The right branch opened up into a larger chamber, about 20 feet across, with a high ceiling that disappeared into darkness above my head. This was where the footprints ended. All 6 sets of prints just stopped, right in the middle of the chamber, like the kids had been standing there together and then just vanished. I walked around the chamber looking for any other exits. There were 2 more passages leading out, but no footprints in either direction. No signs of a struggle. No more blood. Nothing. That's when I noticed my headlamp was getting dimmer. I checked the battery level, still full charge. I tried my backup light, same thing. The beams seemed to be getting absorbed by the darkness instead of pushing it back. My compass was spinning wildly, needle jumping from north to south to west like it couldn't decide which way was which. Underground magnetic interference wasn't uncommon, but this was extreme. I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, heart pounding, and saw nothing. The chamber was empty. But I could have sworn I heard someone walking across the stone floor. Heavy boots, moving slow and deliberate. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone there?" The whispers stopped. Complete silence, except for my own breathing and the sound of blood rushing in my ears. Then I heard a voice, clear as day, speaking English with a thick Cherokee accent. "You should not be here, roofmaker's son." The voice seemed to come from the walls themselves, echoing from every direction at once. And it knew my name. Thatcher means roofmaker in the old language. I pulled out one of my emergency flares and lit it. Red light filled the chamber, pushing back the darkness that my headlamp couldn't seem to touch. In the flickering glow, I saw something that made my blood freeze. There were shapes in the walls, human shapes like people pressed into the stone itself. I could see faces, arms reaching out, mouths open in silent screams. The college kids, all 6 of them, trapped inside the solid rock like insects in amber. And they were still moving. I dropped the flare and ran. I'm not proud of it. 17 years of training, 17 years of staying calm in dangerous situations, and I ran like a scared kid. But seeing those faces in the stone, seeing them move and try to speak, broke something in my brain that wouldn't get fixed for a long time. I made it about 50 yards back toward the main passage before I forced myself to stop. Running in a cave is how people die. One wrong step, one loose rock, and you're at the bottom of a pit with a broken leg, waiting for someone who might never come. I took deep breaths and tried to think. What I'd seen wasn't possible. People don't get absorbed into solid rock. It had to be shadows or some kind of optical illusion caused by the flare light. Caves played tricks on your eyes all the time, but those faces had been moving. I heard voices coming from behind me, back toward the chamber. Multiple voices, talking and laughing like a group of friends on a hiking trip. Young voices, college kids. "Hey, did you see that?" A girl's voice, excited and happy. "Look at these formations, this is incredible." A boy, probably the geology student in the group. "Wait up, guys, my light's acting weird." Another girl, a little worried. They sounded so real, so normal. But I knew the chamber was empty. I'd just been there. Unless the kids were still alive somehow, still trapped in the stone, and what I was hearing were their voices from when they first entered the cave 3 days ago. Like an echo that had gotten caught in the rock and was finally finding its way out. I started back toward the chamber, moving, slow and quiet. Maybe I'd been wrong about what I'd seen. Maybe the kids had found another way out, and what I'd thought were faces in the wall were just natural rock formations that looked like people in the flare light. But as I got closer, the voices changed. They went from happy and excited to confused and scared. "Where's the entrance?" The girl's voice, not happy anymore. "We came from that direction, didn't we?" The boy, uncertain. "Guys, something's wrong. The passage we came through, it's not there anymore." The second girl, definitely scared now. "That's impossible. Caves don't just change." But the boy sounded scared too. I reached the chamber entrance and stopped. The voices were coming from inside, clear and close. But when I looked in, the chamber was empty. Just bare stone and the scattered remains of my dropped flare. "Hello?" I called out. The voices stopped instantly. Complete silence. I lit another flare and stepped into the chamber. The red light showed the same scene as before, the walls covered with fresh carved symbols, and the shapes pressed into the stone. But this time I made myself look closer. The faces were definitely human. 6 college-age kids, 5 boys and 1 girl, trapped in the limestone like they'd been pushed into wet cement that had hardened around them. Their eyes were open, looking at me. Their mouths moved like they were trying to speak. One of them was wearing a Virginia Tech sweatshirt. I walked closer to the wall, holding the flare up. The girl's face was right at eye level, pressed against the stone surface like she was looking through a window. She was pretty, with long brown hair and freckles. She looked terrified. Her mouth moved, and I heard her voice, faint and hollow. like it was coming from very far away. Help. Us. That's when I noticed my watch had stopped. The hands were frozen at 3:17, even though I'd wound it that morning, and it had been working fine when I entered the cave. I couldn't remember what time it had been when I first heard the voices. The flare was burning down. In a few seconds, I'd be back in the darkness with nothing but my failing headlamp. I pulled out another flare, but before I could light it, I heard footsteps again. Slow, heavy boots walking across stone. This time, I saw who was making them. A man stepped out of the shadows at the far end of the chamber, but he wasn't quite a man. He was too tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet, and his skin looked like it was made of the same gray limestone as the cave walls. His eyes glowed with a dim red light, like embers in a dying fire. He wore the remains of what might have been Cherokee clothing from centuries ago, but it was fused with the stone, part of his body now. When he moved, I could hear rocks grinding against each other. "You should not have come here, roofmaker's son." His voice was like stone scraping against stone. "This is sacred ground. The bones of my people rest in the deep chambers. They were disturbed by the Thunderbringers, the ones who shook the earth with their fire powder." I wanted to run again, but my legs wouldn't move. The thing that had once been a man walked closer, each footstep echoing through the chamber like a hammer hitting an anvil. "The young ones who came before you, they carried the same metal tools, the same thunder powder. They sought to map the sacred chambers, to bring others who would disturb the sleep of the dead." He gestured toward the wall where the college kids were trapped. "Now they guard the entrance to the sacred places, as you will guard, roofmaker's son." He reached out with one stone hand toward my face. Where his fingers touched the air, I felt cold that burned like fire. The cave wall behind me started to soften, like clay in the rain. In a few seconds, I would be part of the stone, just like the college kids. Trapped forever, still conscious, still aware, but unable to move or speak, except when this thing allowed it, the Chero. Key stories my grandmother used to tell came flooding back to me. Stories about spirits that protected sacred burial grounds. Spirits that could control the earth itself, that could make stone flow like water. The Hollow Keeper. That's what the old-timers called him, the guardian of the deep places. My flare burned out and everything went black. In the darkness, I heard my own voice screaming. I woke up face down on cold stone, my mouth full of limestone dust and the taste of blood. My headlamp was dead, but I could see a faint red glow coming from somewhere deeper in the cave. I felt around until I found my flashlight. When I clicked it on, the beam was weak but steady. I was still in the chamber, but something had changed. The wall where the college kids had been trapped was smooth now, like it had never been disturbed. But I could hear them, their voices muffled and distant, coming from somewhere behind the stone. My watch was working again. 9:43 p.m. I'd lost over 6 hours with no memory of what had happened. The last thing I remembered was that stone hand reaching for my face. I checked myself over, no injuries except for a bump on the back of my head and some scrapes on my hands. But my rope was gone. My radio was gone. My emergency flares were scattered across the chamber floor, most of them broken. And the entrance I'd come through was sealed. Solid stone wall where the passage used to be. I was trapped. I tried not to panic. There had to be another way out. Caves always had multiple entrances, even if they weren't obvious. I just had to find one. The red glow was coming from one of the passages I hadn't explored yet. I followed it, moving slow and careful. The passage sloped downward for maybe 100 yards, then opened into the biggest cave chamber I'd ever seen. It was huge, like being inside a cathedral. The ceiling was lost in darkness above my head, and the whole space was lit by a red glow that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The stone was warm to the touch, almost hot. The floor of the chamber was covered with bones. Human bones, arranged in careful patterns. Skulls and rib cages and long leg bones laid out in circles and spirals that hurt to look at. Some of them looked old, maybe hundreds of years old, but others were newer, much newer. In the center of the bone patterns stood the Hollow Keeper. He was bigger now, maybe 15 feet tall, and his stone skin was glowing with the same red light as the walls. He didn't look human at all anymore. More like a living cave formation that had learned to walk. "You wake at last, Roofmaker's son." His voice echoed through the chamber like thunder. "I have been waiting." I tried to back toward the entrance, but the passage had sealed itself behind me. "The bones you see were my people," the keeper said. "Cherokee who lived in these mountains for 1,000 years. They knew the sacred places. They knew which caves were doorways to the spirit world, which chambers held the bones of the ancient ones." He gestured toward the bone patterns with one massive stone arm. Then came the white men with their thunder powder. They blasted through the mountain, seeking the black stone that burns. They broke into the sacred chambers. They scattered the bones of my ancestors like leaves in the wind. I found my voice. "That was over 100 years ago. I didn't have anything to do with that." The keeper's red eyes focused on me. "The desecration continues. The young ones who came before you carried metal devices, machines that would map every passage, every chamber. They would bring others, scientists, tourists. The sacred places would become places of profit." The college kids. They'd been mapping the cave system, probably for some kind of research project, maybe planning to turn it into a commercial cave tour. "They were just students," I said. They didn't mean any harm. "Intent does not matter. Only action matters. Only protection matters." The keeper teased. Oka stepped toward me, his stone feet grinding against the bone-covered floor. "You will join them, Roofmaker's son. You will become stone, become part of the mountain itself. Together you will guard the sacred chambers for all time." I looked around desperately for any way out. That's when I saw the stream. A thin trickle of water ran along the far edge of the chamber, probably runoff from the surface, making its way down through cracks in the rock. It wasn't much, but it was moving water. My grandmother's stories came back to me. Earth spirits, she'd said, couldn't cross running water. It was one of the old rules, from back when the Cherokee still lived in these mountains. I started moving toward the stream, trying to look casual about it. The keeper watched me but didn't try to stop me. "There is nowhere to run, Roofmaker's son. The mountain itself obeys my will." I reached the edge of the stream. It was maybe 2 feet wide and a few inches deep. Not much, but it might be enough. The keeper raised both arms, and the chamber started to shake. Rocks fell from the ceiling. The bone patterns on the floor started to shift and rearrange themselves, forming a circle around me. I jumped across the stream. The keeper's roar shook the entire mountain. He lunged toward me, stone arms reaching out, but when he got to the edge of the water, he stopped like he'd hit an invisible wall. "Running water," I said, breathing hard. "You can't cross it." His red eyes blazed with anger. "The stream is small, Roofmaker's son. It will not protect you forever." He was right. The stream led deeper into the cave, toward passages I'd never explored. And streams had a way of disappearing underground, sinking into the rock and leaving nothing but dry stone behind. But I had an idea. I still had one emergency flare left, the one in my jacket pocket. If I could get back to the main chamber, maybe I could use it to blast open the sealed entrance. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot I had. The keeper followed me along the stream bank, staying just out of reach of the running water. Every few steps, he'd try to reshape the cave around me, making new walls appear or opening pits in the floor. But as long as I stayed next to the water, he couldn't touch me directly. The stream led back toward the main chamber through a passage I hadn't seen before. When I got there, I could see where my entrance had been sealed. Just smooth stone now, but I could hear something on the other side. Voices. People calling my name. Backup had arrived. I pulled out my flare and held it up. "You want to protect this place?" I shouted to the keeper. "Fine, but let those college kids go, and I'll seal this cave forever. No more tourists, no more scientists, no more disturbance." The keeper appeared at the edge of the chamber, too big now to fit through the passage. His stone face showed something that might have been surprise. "You would do this? You would trap yourself in the darkness to protect the sacred places of my people? Those kids don't deserve what you did to them," I said. They were just trying to learn. Let them go, and I'll make sure nobody ever bothers your ancestors again." For a long moment, the keeper said nothing. The red glow from his body pulsed like a heartbeat. Then the wall behind me started to crack. The explosion echoed through the cave system for what felt like forever. When the dust settled, I was lying on cold grass under a star-filled sky, coughing up limestone dust and trying to remember how to breathe fresh air. State Police Officer Mills was kneeling next to me, checking my pulse. Behind him, I could see emergency vehicles with their red and blue lights flashing, paramedics setting up equipment, Sheriff Morrison talking on his radio. "Gene? Gene, can you hear me?" Mills looked worried. "We heard the explosion and found you at the entrance. What happened down there?" I tried to sit up. My head felt like someone had hit it with a sledge hammer. "The kids. Did you find the kids?" Mills nodded towards 6 shapes lying on stretchers nearby. Paramedics were working on them, checking vital signs, hooking up IV lines. They were unconscious, but they were breathing. "Found them right next to you," Mills said. "Strangest thing. They were all arranged in a perfect circle like someone had laid them out real careful-like. Been missing for 3 days, but they don't show any signs of dehydration or hypothermia." I looked back at the cave entrance. Where Devil's Throat had been, there was now just a pile of broken rock. The explosion had brought down half the cliff face, sealing the cave system completely. "What about the flare?" I asked. "Did you find the flare?" Mills looked confused. "What flare?" "Gene, you weren't carrying any flares when we found you, just your regular gear." Over the next few weeks, I tried to piece together what had happened. The college kids didn't remember anything after entering the cave. Complete amnesia, the doctors said. Trauma-induced memory loss. They were physically fine except for some scrapes and bruises, but none of them could explain the 3 missing days. Officer Mills had been part of the rescue team that found us. He seemed normal at first, filing his reports, doing his job. But after a few days, people started to notice changes. He'd stopped talking much. When he did speak, it was often in Cherokee, a language he'd never learned. He'd sit in his patrol car for hours, drawing detailed maps of cave systems on the backs of incident reports. The maps all showed the same thing, a network of passages leading to a large chamber filled with carefully arranged bones. The official report said the cave had collapsed due to geological instability. The site was declared permanently off-limits to the public. No more spelunking, no more research projects, no more disturbance. I requested a transfer to surface duties only, told my supervisor I'd developed claustrophobia after the accident. It wasn't entirely a lie. Every time I thought about going underground, I could hear that stone voice echoing in my memory. "You will become stone, become part of the mountain itself." But the real reason I couldn't go back into caves was what I'd learned about myself in those dark hours. When it came down to it, when I had to choose between my own life and doing what was right, I'd made the right choice. The keeper had honored our bargain. The sacred places would stay protected, and the college kids got to go home to their families. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind is blowing through the mountains, I think I can hear drums echoing from the direction where Devil's Throat used to be. Cherokee drums, playing the old songs for the bones that rest in the deep places. And sometimes, when the moon is full and the mountain is quiet, I swear I can see symbols appearing in the new tree growth around the sealed cave entrance. Symbols carved deep in living bark, in the same strange language I'd seen scratched into the limestone walls. The Hollow Keeper is still there, still guarding the sacred chambers, still making sure the bones of his people rest in peace. Officer Mills retired early on medical grounds. Last I heard, he'd moved up to the reservation near Cherokee, North Carolina. The tribal council there hired him as a cultural consultant, helping to identify and protect sacred sites throughout the Appalachian Mountains. He speaks fluent Cherokee now, they tell me. Better than most of the folks who grew up with it. I never went back to Devil's Throat. But sometimes other rangers report strange things from caves throughout the forest. Passages that seem to change direction. Rock formations that look almost like faces. Whispers in languages that died out centuries ago. The mountains are old, and they remember everything. The Cherokee knew that, They understood that some places aren't meant for the living, that some secrets are worth protecting no matter what the cost. I understand it now too. My name is Eugene Thatcher, and I've been a forest ranger for 21 years. I tell people there's no such thing as cave demons, just bad air and darker thoughts. But I know better now. Some hollows are deeper than others, and some keepers never sleep. My name is Margaret Caldwell, but everyone calls me Maggie. I've been a park ranger at Shenandoah National Park for 18 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Bears, lost hikers, flash floods, even a few crazy people who thought they could live off the land with nothing but a pocket knife. But I was wrong. Dead wrong. It was November 1975, and the trees were bare as bones. The sky had been gray for weeks, pressing down on the mountains like a heavy blanket. I was working the Old Rag Mountain area, covering about 40 square miles of backcountry all by myself. That's how I liked it. At 43, I'd given my life to these mountains. Never married, no kids. My sister in Richmond thought I was crazy, living alone in a cabin, spending my days walking trails that most people never see. "You need to get out more, Maggie," she'd say every time she called. "Meet someone nice, have a normal life." But this was my normal, and I loved it. The trouble started with the Hendersons, a young couple from Baltimore who'd been backpacking the White Oak Canyon Trail. They stumbled into the ranger station 3 days early, looking like they'd seen a ghost. "Something was following us," Mrs. Henderson kept saying. She couldn't stop shaking, even with a hot cup of coffee in her hands. "In the shadows, always in the shadows." Her husband wasn't much better. We'd set up camp, get everything perfect, then wake up to find our gear moved around. Not stolen, just arranged different, like someone was playing with us. I'd heard stories like this before. The woods can play tricks on your mind, especially when you're tired and the light starts failing. "Shadows can look like a lot of things," I told them, using my calmest voice. "Your eyes get tired, your brain fills in the blanks. Shadow people are just tricks of light and tired eyes. But they had pictures, Polaroids from their trip." Mr. Henderson spread them out on my desk with shaking hands. "Look at these. Really look." I did, and my coffee went cold in my mouth. In every single photo, there were dark shapes that didn't belong. Not tree shadows or rock shadows, but human-shaped darkness standing where no person should be. Behind their tent, next to the waterfall, even right beside Mrs. Henderson in one shot, though she was alone when the picture was taken. "These are just camera problems," I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. "Double exposure, maybe." They left that afternoon, and I filed their report under unusual wildlife sightings, which was our code for things we couldn't explain but didn't want to write up officially. But I couldn't get those photos out of my head. 2 days later, I got a call from Jim Peters, one of the part-time rangers who worked weekends. His voice was tight with worry. "Maggie, I need you to come to mile marker 12 on Skyline Drive. Right now." "What's wrong?" "Just come, and bring the first aid kit." I found Jim standing next to a man who was sitting on a rock, staring at nothing. The man looked about 60 years old, with completely white hair and skin like paper. But according to his driver's license, he was only 28. "Found him this morning," Jim whispered. "Solo hiker. Left his car at the trailhead yesterday. He was supposed to be camping one night. Easy trip." The man, his name was David Walsh, wouldn't speak, wouldn't look at us. Just sat there staring at his hands like he'd never seen them before. His pupils were huge, black circles that didn't change even when I shined a flashlight right in his face. "David," I said gently, "can you tell me what happened?" For a long moment, nothing. Then, in a voice like dry leaves, "It took my shadow." I looked down. David Walsh was sitting in full sunlight. And he cast no shadow at all. That's when I called Dr. Ellis, the park psychologist who came in once a week to help visitors who'd had accidents or panic attacks in the wilderness. He was a good man, smart and calm, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. If anyone could help David, it was him. "I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Ellis told me after examining David. We were standing outside the ranger station while David sat inside, still staring at nothing. It's like someone took 25 years of his life and crumpled them up overnight. "What about the shadow thing?" Dr. Ellis looked uncomfortable. "Could be a side effect of whatever traumatized him. The mind can play strange tricks when it's trying to protect itself from something too awful to remember." But I'd looked real careful. David Walsh had no shadow, not even the faintest outline. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those photos from the Hendersons. Dark shapes that shouldn't exist. I got up and made coffee, then sat at my kitchen table going through every strange report I'd gotten in the past month. 7 unusual incidents, all in the same area, all involving people who said they were being followed by shadows. I was still reading when the sun came up. That's when I noticed something that made my blood turn to ice water. My coffee cup was sitting on the table, steam rising from the hot liquid inside. The morning light was coming through my kitchen window, hitting the cup perfectly. But the shadow it cast was wrong. Instead of a simple circle, the shadow looked like a hand reaching across the table toward me. I moved the cup. The shadow moved with it, but always in the shape of that reaching hand. I was no longer dealing with tired eyes and tricks of light. Something was very, very wrong in my mountains. I spent that morning checking my equipment twice, then headed out to the trail where David Walsh had been found. If something was happening in my park, I was going to find out what. The White Oak Canyon Trail was one of my favorites. The 6-mile loop that took hikers past 3 waterfalls and some of the most beautiful views in Virginia. I'd walked it hundreds of times, knew every root and rock. But that morning it felt different, like the whole forest was holding its breath. The first strange thing I noticed was the silence. No birds, no squirrels chattering in the trees. Even the wind seemed muffled, like someone had wrapped the whole mountain in cotton. I found David's campsite about 2 miles in. His tent was still there, perfectly set up, but his sleeping bag and backpack were arranged in a perfect circle around a pile of stones. Not scattered like animals had gotten into them, but arranged, neat and careful, like someone had been playing a game. I took pictures with my own camera, a good 35mm that I'd used for evidence photos before. Through the viewfinder, everything looked normal, but when I looked up from the camera, I could swear I saw movement in my peripheral vision, dark shapes slipping between the trees just at the edge of my sight. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there? This is Park Ranger Caldwell." The silence got deeper, if that was possible, but I felt watched. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and my hands started to sweat despite the cold air. I was packing up David's gear when my flashlight started acting weird. I'd turned it on to see better inside the tent, and instead of one beam of light creating one shadow, everything was casting 3 or 4 shadows. Multiple dark shapes radiating out from every object like a broken mirror. "Come on," I muttered, smacking the flashlight. But it kept working fine. It was just that the shadows were multiplying. That's when I heard the footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, circling my position. I could hear leaves crunching and twigs snapping, but I couldn't see anyone. The sounds moved in a complete circle around David's campsite. Owl. Ways staying just out of sight behind the trees. "I'm armed," I called out, putting my hand on the .38 revolver at my hip. "Identify yourself." The footsteps stopped. I waited, barely, breathing, for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then I heard something that made my skin crawl. My own voice coming from the trees saying, "Identify yourself," over and over like a broken record. That's when I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran like hell back down that trail, David's gear bouncing on my back. I didn't stop until I reached my truck, and I didn't stop shaking until I was back at the ranger station. Dr. Ellis was still there, sitting with David Walsh and trying to get him to eat something. "How is he?" I asked, still out of breath. "No better. He keeps talking about his shadow being stolen and—" Dr. Ellis paused. "Maggie, this is going to sound crazy, but I've been here all day, and I swear David's shadow hasn't moved once. Even when he gets up to use the bathroom, his shadow stays in the chair." I looked. David was standing by the window, but his shadow, faint but visible now, was still sitting in the chair where he'd been before. "That's impossible," I whispered. "I know, but I've been watching for hours." That evening, I drove home with my headlights on, even though it wasn't fully dark yet. Every shadow on the road seemed to move wrong, and I kept checking my rear-view mirror to make sure nothing was following me. At home, I called my sister in Richmond just to hear a normal human voice. "Maggie, you sound terrible. Are you sick?" "Just tired," I lied. "How are Mom and Dad?" We talked for 20 minutes about normal things: her job at the bank, Dad's garden, Mom's church group. It felt like a lifeline to the real world, the world where shadows behaved like they were supposed to. After I hung up, I made dinner and tried to act normal. But every time I walked past a mirror, I caught myself checking to make sure my reflection was doing exactly what I was doing. At 10 o'clock, I was getting ready for bed when I heard a knock at my door. A soft, polite knock like a neighbor dropping by to borrow sugar. "Who is it?" I called through the door. No answer. Just another soft knock. I looked through the peephole. Nobody there. But on my porch, clear as day, was a shadow. A human-shaped shadow with no person casting it, standing right in front of my door. I backed away from the door, my heart hammering. The knocking came again, patient and polite. I grabbed my revolver and went to the back door, planning to circle around and see what was really on my porch. But when I looked out the back window, there was another shadow standing in my backyard, also human-shaped, also without anyone there to cast it. I was surrounded. The knocking stopped. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then I heard my own voice coming from outside, saying, "Who is it? Who is it?" over and over. I spent that night sitting in my kitchen with every light in the house turned on, my gun in my lap, watching shadows that moved when they shouldn't, and praying for sunrise. When morning finally came, the shadows were gone. But when I looked in my bathroom mirror to brush my teeth, my reflection was brushing its hair. I wasn't brushing my hair. I was brushing my teeth. But my reflection, my own face looking back at me, was doing something different. That's when I knew this wasn't just some weird animal or crazy person playing games in the woods. This was something else entirely. Something that could steal shadows and make reflections lie. Something that was hunting in my mountains. I didn't sleep for the next 2 days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my reflection brushing its hair while I brushed my teeth. Dr. Ellis said it was stress and exhaustion, but Dr. Ellis hadn't seen what I'd seen. "You need to take some time off, Maggie," he told me on Wednesday morning. We were sitting in the ranger station, and David Walsh was still in the chair by the window, staring at nothing. His shadow had started moving again, but it was always a few seconds behind what David was actually doing. "I can't leave now," I said. "Not with this happening." "With what happening? One confused hiker and some unusual reports? You're starting to sound like David." But that afternoon, everything changed. I got a radio call from Jenny Martinez, a weekend ranger who was checking the backcountry campsites. Her voice was high and tight with panic. "Maggie, I need backup at Cedar Run Falls right now." "What's wrong?" "I found them. The 2 backpackers from the missing person report." "But Maggie," her voice broke, "they're dead, and they look like they've been dead for months." I drove out there with my heart in my throat. Tom and Lisa Chen had been reported missing 3 days ago by Lisa's parents when they didn't come home from what should have been a weekend camping trip. They were experienced hikers, good people who knew the mountains well. I found Jenny sitting on a log about 50 yards from the campsite, crying quietly. "I'm sorry," she said when she saw me. I've never seen anything like that." The Chen's tent was set up perfectly, just like David's had been. But Tom and Lisa were lying inside, and they looked like mummies. Their skin was gray and papery, their hair white as snow. They looked like they'd aged 50 years overnight. "How long have they been missing?" I asked Jenny. 3 days. "They look like they've been dead for weeks." "I know. I took photos and called for the coroner, but I already knew what he'd find. No signs of violence, no apparent cause of death. Just two healthy young people who had somehow aged to death in 3 days. While we waited for the coroner, I looked around their campsite. Like David's, everything was arranged in neat patterns. Their hiking boots were lined up in a perfect row. Their camping gear was sorted by size and color. And their cameras had rolls of film still in them. When I got the pictures developed later, they told a story that made my blood run cold. Day 1, normal camping photos. Tom and Lisa smiling by their tent, cooking dinner over a small camp stove. Day 2, the background started showing dark shapes, human-shaped shadows with no people to cast them. Day 3, Tom and Lisa looked tired, confused. In every photo, their own shadows were getting fainter and fainter. The last photo was taken with the camera's timer. It showed Tom and Lisa sitting by their campfire, but they cast no shadows at all. Behind them, standing just at the edge of the firelight, was a figure made entirely of darkness, a human shape that seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. That night, Dr. Ellis didn't go home. He said he wanted to stay and monitor David Walsh, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He'd seen the photos too. "This is impossible," he kept saying. "People don't just age to death. Shadows don't move on their own." But David Walsh looked 10 years older than he had that morning, and Dr. Ellis's shadow had started acting strange too, sometimes reaching for things that Dr. Ellis wasn't reaching for, sometimes moving a few seconds after Dr. Ellis moved. "It's getting stronger," David said suddenly. It was the first complete sentence he'd spoken since we found him. "What's getting stronger?" I asked. "The shadow man. He takes a little bit each day. First just the shadow, then the memories, then the years. He's been lonely for so long." "Who is he, David?" David looked at me with those huge, dark pupils. "A soldier. He died alone and afraid. And now he steals shadows, so he won't be alone anymore." That's when the lights went out. Not just in the ranger station, but everywhere. The whole area went dark, like someone had thrown a switch. Through the windows, I could see that even the emergency lights along the highway were off. In the darkness, David Walsh started laughing. Not a happy laugh, but the kind of sound someone makes when they've finally given up hope. "He's coming," David whispered. "He's coming for all of us now." I fumbled for my flashlight, but when I turned it on, it didn't help. The beam of light seemed to get swallowed up after just a few feet, like the darkness was too thick to penetrate. That's when I saw them. Shadows moving across the walls, but wrong shadows. They were moving independently, like dark people walking around the room. Some were tall, some were short, but they all moved with purpose. "Dr. Ellis?" I called out. "I'm here." His voice came from somewhere to my left. "Maggie, I can't see my hands. I'm holding them right in front of my face, and I can't see them." I tried to reach for where his voice was coming from, but my arms felt heavy, like I was moving through water. And I was cold. So cold that my breath started coming out in white puffs. "He takes the warmth too," David said, his voice getting fainter. "Takes everything that makes you alive." The shadow people on the walls were getting more solid, more real. I could see their faces now. Tired, sad faces with empty eye sockets. And they were all looking at me. One of them stepped off the wall, just stepped right out of the flat surface like it was a doorway, becoming three-dimensional as it moved into the room. It was shaped like a man in an old-fashioned uniform, but made entirely of darkness. When it moved, it made no sound, but I could feel it sucking the heat and light out of the air around it. "Please," I whispered, backing toward the door. "I don't understand what you want." The shadow man tilted its head like it was listening. Then, in a voice like wind through dry leaves, it spoke. "Not alone. Never alone again." More shadow people were stepping off the walls now. Men and women and even children, all made of darkness, all with those empty eye sockets fixed on me and Dr. Ellis. I felt something cold touch my shoulder and spun around. Dr. Ellis was standing right behind me, but his face was gray and his hair had gone completely white. He looked like he'd aged 20 years in 20 minutes. "Maggie," he whispered, "I can't see my shadow anymore. I think it's gone." I looked down. Dr. Ellis was standing in the beam of my flashlight, but he cast no shadow at all. That's when I realized that my own shadow had been getting fainter all evening. And now, in the direct beam of light, I could barely see it at all. The shadow people were surrounding us, their cold presence making the air so frigid that ice was forming on the windows. Their leader, the man in the uniform, reached out with a hand made of pure darkness. "Join us," he said in that wind voice. "No more lonely, no more afraid." His cold fingers touched my face, and I felt years of my life drain away like water down a sink. The touch of that shadow hand sent me tumbling through someone else's memories like I was falling down a well made of time. I saw a young soldier, maybe 19 years old, with scared eyes and a uniform that was too big for his thin frame. It was 1863, and he was lost in these same mountains during a Civil War skirmish. His name was William Thorne, and he'd been separated from his unit during a retreat. For 3 days, he wandered alone through the wilderness, getting weaker and more afraid. No food, little water, and the constant terror that enemy soldiers might find him. On the 3rd night, as he lay dying of exposure and fear, he made a desperate wish. "Please, God, don't let me die alone. Don't let me be forgotten." But he did die alone, curled up under a rock overhang not 2 miles from where we stood now. And his fear and loneliness were so strong that they soaked into the very shadows of the mountain, creating something that should never have existed. For over 100 years, William Thorne had been stealing shadows and memories, trying to build himself a company of the dead so he would never have to face eternity alone. He reshadow. He carried a piece of someone's life, someone's warmth, someone's years. I jerked back to the present as Dr. Ellis collapsed beside me. His hair was now completely white, and his face had the papery look of someone very, very old. "I understand now," I gasped, my own voice sounding weaker than it should. The shadow man's touch had aged me too. I could feel it, the stiffness in my joints, the weight of years that weren't mine. "You're William Thorne. You died here during the Civil War." The shadow soldier's empty eye sockets fixed on me. "Lonely," he whispered. "So lonely. Cold and dark and lonely." "But this isn't the way," I said, struggling to my feet. My knees creaked like an old woman's. "Stealing people's lives, aging them to death. That's not friendship. That's not company. That's just more loneliness." The other shadow people were pressing closer, and I could see they were all his victims from over the years. Hikers, hunters, people who'd gotten lost or separated from their groups. All of them trapped in darkness, all of them still afraid. "What if," I said, the idea coming to me suddenly, "what if you didn't have to be alone, but you didn't have to steal shadows to do it?" William Thorne's shadow head tilted slightly. "Your grave," I said, "where you died. It's unmarked, isn't it? Forgotten. What if someone visited you? What if someone remembered your name?" The temperature in the room dropped even further. Ice was forming on the walls now, and my breath came out in thick white clouds. "Lies," William hissed. "Everyone forgets. Everyone leaves." "Not if I promise," I said. "Not if I give you my word as a ranger. These are my mountains now, William. I protect them and everyone in them. That includes you." The shadow people were all staring at me now, hope flickering in their empty eye sockets like candle flames. "I'll visit your grave every week," I continued. "I'll bring flowers. I'll tell people your story. You'll never be forgotten again. But you have to let these people go. You have to let their shadows return." William Thorne stood silent for a long moment. Around us, the other shadows were waiting, the air so cold that frost was forming on my eyelashes. "Promise?" he whispered finally. "I promise. Every week? Every single week, rain or shine, summer and winter, until I'm too old to walk these mountains anymore, and then I'll make sure someone else knows to visit you." The shadow soldier reached out again, but this time his touch was gentle, like a child seeking comfort. "So tired," he sighed. "So very tired." "I know. You can rest now. You don't have to be alone anymore. The change happened all at once. The stolen shadows began flowing back to their owners like dark water finding its level. I felt my own shadow return, bringing with it the years that had been taken from me. Dr. Ellis gasped and sat up, color returning to his face. But the shadow people weren't disappearing, they were changing. The darkness was leaving them, replaced by a soft, peaceful light. I could see their real faces now, the faces they'd had in life, and they were smiling. William Thorne was the last to change. As the darkness left him, I saw the scared young man he'd really been, thin and frightened, but with kind eyes. "Thank you," he said in a voice like a summer breeze. "Thank you for remembering." The light grew brighter and brighter until I had to close my eyes. When I opened them again, the ranger station was back to normal. The lights were on, the temperature was normal, and David Walsh was sitting up in his chair, looking confused but healthy. "Where am I?" he asked. "What happened?" Dr. Ellis was examining his hands, flexing his fingers like he couldn't believe they worked properly. "I remember now," he said softly. "I remember losing my shadow, aging, feeling so cold. But it's like waking up from a nightmare." Outside, dawn was breaking over the mountains. The first real sunrise I'd seen in days, but I could feel the change in myself. My hair had gone silver white, and when I looked in the mirror, there were new lines around my eyes. The encounter had aged me about 10 years, permanently. A small price to pay for the lives that had been saved. The official report blamed everything on altitude sickness and mass hysteria. The coroner found that Tom and Lisa Chen had died of exposure and dehydration, even though their bodies told a different story. David Walsh was listed as suffering from severe psychological trauma and temporary amnesia. Dr. Ellis and I never talked about what really happened. We couldn't. Who would believe us? But I kept my promise. Every Tuesday morning, I hiked to a small clearing about 2 miles up the White Oak Canyon Trail. There's a rock overhang there, and underneath it is a pile of stones that marks where William Thorne died alone and afraid in 1863. I bring flowers, usually wildflowers, that I pick along the trail. Mountain laurel in the spring, black-eyed Susans in summer, goldenrod in the fall. In winter, I bring evergreen boughs, and I talk to him. I tell him about the park, about the hikers who come through, about the wildlife I've seen. I tell him that he's not forgotten, that someone knows his name and his story. The strange report stopped after that November. No more shadow people, no more unexplained aging, no more stolen shadows. The mountains went back to being just mountains, beautiful and peaceful and normal. Well, mostly normal. Sometimes, on overcast days near the old Civil War sites, shadows still behave a little strangely. They move just a fraction of a second slower than they should, or they seem a bit darker than normal. Park historians say it's just the way the light falls among the trees. But I know better. There are other places in these mountains where traumatic things happened. Other battlefields, other sites where people died alone and afraid. And sometimes I wonder if William Thorne wasn't the only one who couldn't let go. I'm 53 now, planning to retire in a few years. My hair is cotes, completely silver, and I tire more easily than I used to. The encounter with the Shadow Walker took more out of me than I like to admit, but I still love these mountains, and I still protect them. My replacement will be a young man named James Riley, fresh out of college with a degree in wildlife management. He's smart and eager and full of energy. Last week I started telling him about the history of the park, about the Civil War battles that were fought here, about the importance of remembering the people who died in these mountains. There's a grave I visit every Tuesday, I told him. Just a pile of stones up the White Oak Canyon Trail. A young soldier named William Thorne who died there in 1863. When I retire, I'd like someone to keep visiting him, to make sure he's not forgotten. James looked at me strangely, but he nodded. Sure, Ranger Caldwell, I can do that. Good. Because I've learned that loneliness can be a terrible thing. It can twist and change people, make them do desperate things to avoid being alone. But remembering the dead, honoring their stories, visiting their graves, that's not just kindness. Sometimes it's protection. for all of us. Last Tuesday, when I brought fresh flowers to William's grave, I found something there that hadn't been there before. A single white rose, still damp with morning dew, lying on the pile of stones. I hadn't brought a white rose. I never bring white roses. But the rose was there, fresh and perfect and clearly placed with care. As I knelt to arrange my wildflowers next to it, I heard something that made me smile despite the chill that ran down my spine. A whispered thank you, carried on the mountain wind. I finished arranging the flowers and stood to leave. As I walked back down the trail, I could swear I saw a figure walking parallel to me through the trees, tall and thin, wearing what might have been an old military uniform. But when I turned to look directly, there was nothing there except shadows and morning light filtering through the bare branches. Some promises, I've learned, work both ways. I remember William Thorne, and in return, he watches over these mountains and the people who visit them. It's a good arrangement, one that benefits everyone. But I still carry multiple flashlights when I hike alone, and I still check mirrors carefully to make sure my reflection is doing exactly what I'm doing, because there are other battlefields in these mountains, other places where people died alone and afraid. And sometimes, on very dark nights when the fog rolls in thick and heavy, I hear footsteps that don't belong to any living thing. The shadow walker may be at rest, but the mountains hold many secrets, and some shadows, once freed, never quite learn how to behave the way they should. My name is Margaret Caldwell, and I've been protecting these mountains for 20 years now. Most days, it's the best job in the world. But some days, I remember that protection goes both ways, and that the dead sometimes protect the living just as much as the living remember the dead. Just last week, a solo hiker got lost on the old rag trail during a sudden fog. He wandered for hours, completely turned around, when a figure appeared out of the mist and led him back to the main trail. The hiker said the figure looked like a young man in an old-fashioned military uniform, but when he turned to thank his rescuer, no one was there. The hiker made it out safely. They always do now. William Thorne has learned a better way to keep from being alone. Instead of stealing shadows, he guides lost souls to safety. Instead of aging people to death, he helps them live. It's amazing what a little remembrance can do, what a few flowers and a weekly visit can accomplish. But I still warn every new ranger about hiking alone after dark. And I still tell them to carry extra batteries for their flashlights. Because, while William Thorne has found peace, these mountains are old and full of history. And sometimes, history has very long shadows indeed. My name is Dorothy McLeod, but everyone calls me Dot. I've been a ranger on the Blue Ridge Parkway for 13 years now, and I've seen just about everything these mountains can throw at a person. Ice storms that coat every tree branch like glass. Fog so thick you can't see your own boots. Bears that wander into campsites looking for food. Lost hikers who think flip-flops are proper mountain gear. What I hadn't seen, until March of 1977, was something that made me question everything I thought I knew about these ancient hills. I became a ranger after my tour in Vietnam, where I worked as an Army nurse. After seeing so much death and pain, I wanted something peaceful. The mountains seemed like the perfect place to heal. Most days they were. I'd drive the winding roads, check on visitors, help with broken-down cars, and make sure people stayed safe. It was quiet work, and I liked it that way. The Blue Ridge has always been my sanctuary. These mountains are old, older than anything you can imagine. The Cherokee lived here first. Then came the Scots-Irish settlers in the 1700s. They brought their stories with them, tales of spirits and warnings from the old country. But I never put much stock in ghost stories. I'm a practical woman. You have to be when you're the first female ranger in this part of North Carolina. My station covers the Grandfather Mountain area, including Rough Ridge Trail. It's beautiful country, but dangerous if you're not careful. The weather can change in minutes, and the trails can be tricky even for experienced hikers. Every year, we lose a few people who don't respect the mountains. Hypothermia, falls, getting lost. The wilderness doesn't forgive mistakes. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in mid-March. An ice storm had moved through the night before, coating everything in a thick layer of crystal. The trees looked like they were made of glass, and the roads were treacherous. I'd already called in to have several trails closed and was making my rounds to post warning signs. That's when the Hendersons found me. Bill and Mary Henderson were in their 50s, visiting from Florida. They flagged me down near the Rough Ridge parking area, both of them looking shaken. "Ranger, thank God you're here," Bill said, his breath making white puffs in the cold air. "We heard someone screaming for help up on the trail. A woman, sounds like she's in real trouble." I grabbed my radio and emergency pack. "How long ago? Which direction?" "About 20 minutes, Mary said. It was coming from up toward the ridge. We wanted to help, but the trail's too icy. We nearly slipped and fell twice just getting back to the car." I listened carefully, but heard nothing except the wind through the ice-coated branches. "You folks head on down to Blowing Rock. I'll check it out." "Be careful," Mary called as I started up the trail. She sounded terrified. The ice made every step dangerous. My boots had good tread, but I still had to use my hiking poles for balance. The trees creaked ominously overhead, weighted down with ice. Every now and then, a branch would crack and fall, shattering like glass on the frozen ground. I'd been hiking for about 15 minutes when I heard it. A woman's voice, high and desperate, echoing across the mountain. "Help me! Please! Someone help me!" The sound made my skin crawl. There was something wrong about it, though I couldn't put my finger on what. I called back, "This is Ranger McLeod. Where are you?" The screaming stopped immediately. The silence that followed felt heavy, like the mountains themselves were holding their breath. I kept climbing, moving as fast as I dared on the icy trail. The voice had seemed to come from the ridge area, maybe half a mile ahead. But when I reached the spot ere I thought it originated, I found nothing. No footprints, no signs that anyone had been there. The snow was undisturbed except for my own tracks. I spent 2 hours searching that ridge, calling out, checking every possible spot where someone might have fallen or gotten trapped. Nothing. It was like the voice had come from thin air. That night, back at the ranger station, I filed my report. No evidence of distressed hiker on Rough Ridge Trail, possible echo effect from distant location. But even as I wrote it, I knew something was off. I'd been in these mountains long enough to know how sound travels. That voice had been close, very close. I went home to my small cabin near Asheville, made myself a simple dinner, and tried to forget about it. But as I lay in bed that night, I kept hearing that desperate cry echoing in my memory. There had been something about the voice that bothered me, something beyond just the words. It hadn't sounded quite human. The next morning I got the call at 6 a.m. Jake Hendricks, the park maintenance supervisor, sounded rattled. "Dot, you need to get up here. We found 2 people on Rough Ridge. They're dead." I dressed quickly and drove up the winding road to the trailhead. Jake met me at the parking area, his face grim. He was a tough guy who'd been working in these mountains for 20 years, but I could see something had shaken him badly. "Tom and Sarah Mitchell from Charlotte," he said as we hiked up the trail. "Young couple, maybe mid-20s. They were found about 200 yards up, just off the main path." "Hypothermia?" I asked. It was the most common cause of death up here when the weather turned bad. That's what I thought at first. But Dot, you need to see this. We found the bodies in a small clearing beside the trail. The young couple sat with their backs against a large boulder, arms around each other, as if they'd been trying to keep warm. Their faces were peaceful, eyes closed, but their skin had a strange blue-white color I'd never seen before. What really caught my attention, though, it was the ice. Both bodies were surrounded by elaborate ice formations that looked almost intentional. Delicate spirals and curves that seemed to flow up from the ground around them like frozen flowers. The ice was crystal clear and so intricate it looked carved by an artist. "Ever see anything like that before?" Jake asked quietly. I knelt down for a closer look, being careful not to disturb anything before the coroner arrived. The ice formations were beautiful in a disturbing way, far too complex to be natural. But there was something else. The way the ice seemed to reach toward the couple, like frozen hands trying to touch them. "No," I said finally. "Never." We waited for the county medical examiner, but the ice on the roads meant it would be hours before anyone could reach us. While Jake headed back to get more supplies, I stayed with the bodies, partly out of duty, and partly because something about the scene bothered me. That's when I heard the voice again. "They wouldn't listen," it said, clear as day. I spun around, searching the trees. "Who's there?" Silence. My radio crackled with static, then cleared. "Ranger McLeod, this is base. Do you copy?" I copy. "Everything's fine here." But it wasn't fine. Not at all. I spent the rest of that day helping the coroner and answering questions from the county sheriff. The official cause of death was hypothermia brought on by exposure, complicated by the ice storm. The unusual ice formations were attributed to the specific weather conditions. But that night, alone in the ranger station catching up on paperwork, I started doing some research. The area around Rough Ridge had a history. Back in the 1700s, it had been settled by Scottish and Irish immigrants who brought their traditions with them. One of those traditions was belief in banshees, spirits who warned of coming death with their wails and cries. I found an oldie book in the station's dusty library about local folklore. According to the stories, several Highland families had settled in this exact area. They'd fled Scotland after clan warfare, destroyed their homes, carrying nothing but their memories and their beliefs. One story stood out. A woman named Moira McBride had been the clan's keening woman, someone who could sense when death was coming and would wail to warn others. She'd saved many lives back in Scotland with her warnings. But when her family came to North Carolina, something had changed her. The loneliness of the new world, the loss of her homeland, had twisted her gift into something darker. According to the tale, she still wandered the mountains, screaming warnings that had become prophecies of doom. Those who heard her voice and ignored her warnings would die within days, found frozen solid no matter what the temperature. I closed the book with a snap. "Nonsense," I said aloud to the empty station. "Banshees are Irish fairy tales, not Appalachian reality." But even as I said it, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The next 3 nights, I heard the screaming, always around midnight, always from the direction of Rough Ridge. A woman's voice, high and keening, filled with desperate warning. The first night, I drove up to investigate but found nothing. The second night, I called it into the sheriff's department, but they said their deputies couldn't hear anything. The third night, I sat in my patrol truck at the Rough Ridge parking area, waiting. At 11:47 p.m., the temperature inside my heated truck began to drop. I could see my breath. The radio filled with static, and then, clear as if someone were standing right next to my window, I heard the voice. "Beware the mountain's hunger," it wailed. "Beware the cold that kills the foolish. Death comes for those who will not heed the warning." I looked out my windows but saw nothing except the dark forest. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Who are you?" I called out. "What do you want?" The voice stopped. And for a moment, the only sound was my own breathing. Then softer now, almost sad. "I am the warning they will not hear. I am the voice that speaks too late." When I got back to the station, I found Jake waiting for me. His face was pale and his hands were shaking. "Dot," he said, "I think I saw her. The woman who's been screaming." "Where?" "Up on Rough Ridge about an hour ago. I was doing a final check on the trail closure signs. She was standing at the edge of the clearing where we found those kids. Tall woman in an old-fashioned dress, long hair blowing in the wind. When I called out to her, she turned toward me, and her eyes—" Jake shuddered. "Her eyes were like ice, Dot. Not blue like ice, actually made of ice. And when she opened her mouth to speak, frost came out instead of breath." I stared at him. Jake wasn't the type to make things up or see things that weren't there. "What did she say?" "She said my name. Just once. Jake Hendricks." Then she pointed toward the parking area and vanished. We looked at each other in the fluorescent light of the ranger station, two practical mountain people trying to make sense of something that defied explanation. "Maybe we should request backup from Asheville," I said finally. Jake nodded. "Maybe we should." But I already knew that whatever was happening on Rough Ridge, it was something that backup couldn't help us with. The next morning brought news that made my stomach drop. 3 more hikers had gone missing overnight, a family from Tennessee who'd been camping in the area despite the weather warnings. Their car was still in the parking lot, but their campsite was empty except for their gear, which was covered in the same strange ice formations we'd seen around the Mitchell couple. Sheriff's deputies found the bodies that afternoon, but not where anyone expected. Instead of being on the trail, they were over nearly a mile away, in a place so remote and difficult to reach that experienced climbers would have trouble getting there in good weather, let alone during an ice storm. The father, mother, and teenage son were arranged in a perfect triangle, each one sitting upright against separate trees. Like the others, they showed signs of severe hypothermia, but their expressions were different. Where the Mitchell couple had looked peaceful, these 3 looked terrified. Their eyes were wide open, staring at something that was no longer there. The ice formations around them were more elaborate than before. Spiraling towers that reached up toward the branches, creating an almost cathedral-like structure around each body. It would have taken hours to create such formations naturally, but the timeline didn't work. The family had been seen alive just 6 hours before their bodies were discovered. "This isn't natural," Jake said as we stood at the edge of the scene, waiting for the coroner. "Ice doesn't form like that, not in 6 hours, not in any kind of weather." I had to agree. I'd lived through dozens of ice storms in these mountains, and I'd never seen anything like it. That's when we heard the screaming again. But this time, it was different. Instead of the desperate cry for help, it was a long, mournful wail that seemed to echo from every direction at once. The sound made the hair on my arms stand up, and I noticed that the temperature around us dropped at least 10 degrees. "There," Jake whispered, pointing toward a ridge about 200 yards away. I saw her then, for the first time, a tall woman in a long dress that looked like it belonged in a museum. Her hair was long and dark, whipping in a wind that I couldn't feel where we stood. Even from that distance, I could see her pale skin and the way she seemed to shimmer, like heat waves but in reverse. She raised her arms toward the sky and let out another wail, a sound so full of grief and warning that it made my chest hurt. Then she turned her head directly toward us, and even across that distance. As I felt the weight of her gaze, she lifted one arm and pointed straight at Jake. "Jake Hendricks." Her voice carried impossibly clearly across the space between us. "Your warmth fades. Your time grows short." Jake staggered backward like he'd been hit. The color drained from his face, and his breath began coming out in white puffs, even though the air around me still felt relatively warm. "What's happening to me?" he gasped. I grabbed his arm and was shocked by how cold his skin felt through his jacket. "We need to get you to a hospital. Now." But as I started to lead him back toward our vehicles, the woman's voice followed us. "The mountain has claimed what the mountain will have. Those who do not heed the warning, join the cold forever." I half carried Jake to my truck, but by the time we reached it, he was shivering so violently he could barely stand. I cranked the heat to maximum and radioed for an ambulance, but Jake's condition was getting worse by the minute. Can't feel my hands," he mumbled through chattering teeth. I checked his pulse and found it weak and irregular. His skin was turning the same blue-white color I'd seen on the other victims. Hypothermia was setting in fast. Too fast for the ambient temperature. "Stay with me, Jake," I said, wrapping him in every blanket I could find in the truck. "Help is coming." But as we waited, I kept looking back toward the ridge where I'd seen the woman. She was gone, but I could still feel her presence, like a cold spot in my consciousness. The ambulance took 40 minutes to reach us through the icy roads. By then, Jake was barely conscious, his body temperature dangerously low despite all my efforts to warm him. The paramedics worked on him quickly, wrapping him in heated blankets and starting an IV. "What happened to him?" one of them asked as they loaded him into the ambulance. "Exposure," I said, Becca. What else could I say? That a ghost had pointed at him and somehow drained all the heat from his body? That would get me a psychological evaluation and a forced retirement. I followed the ambulance to the hospital in Boone, where Jake was admitted to intensive care. The doctors said his condition was consistent with severe hypothermia, but they couldn't explain how he'd gotten so cold so quickly. His core temperature was down to 89 degrees when he came in, Dr. Sarah Chen told me in the waiting room. That's life-threatening hypothermia, but according to your report, he was only exposed to the cold for about 30 minutes. The ice storm's been pretty severe, I said weakly. Even so, this degree of hypothermia usually takes hours of exposure. Has he been taking any medications that might affect his circulation? I shook my head. Jake was one of the healthiest people I knew. While Jake fought for his life in the ICU, I drove back to Rough Ridge. I needed to understand what was happening, and I had a feeling the answer was up on that mountain. The sun was setting as I reached the parking area, painting the ice-covered trees in shades of orange and gold. Beautiful and deadly, like everything else in these mountains. I hiked up to the spot where we'd found the family, my boots crunching on the frozen ground. The elaborate ice formations were still there, but they looked different in the fading light, more organic, almost like they were growing. As darkness fell, I set up a small camp at the edge of the clearing. If this woman, this entity, was going to appear again, I wanted to be ready. I had my emergency gear, my radio, and a thermos of hot coffee that I hoped would keep me warm. At 11:30, the temperature began to drop. At 11:45, I started seeing my breath. At midnight exactly, she appeared. This time, she was much closer, maybe 50 feet away, standing at the edge of the tree line. In the beam of my flashlight, she looked almost solid, but I could see the trees behind her through her body. She was tall, probably close to 6 feet, with long, dark hair that moved in a wind I couldn't feel. Her dress was from another century, heavy fabric with intricate patterns that looked Celtic. But it was her face that held my attention. She was beautiful in an otherworldly way, with high cheekbones and pale skin. But her eyes were the most unsettling thing I'd ever seen. Not just blue, but actually made of ice, reflecting my flashlight beam like mirrors. When she spoke, frost formed in the air around her words. "Dorothy McLeod," she said, and hearing my name in her voice made my blood run cold. "Daughter of the clans, you carry the old blood." "Who are you?" I managed to ask. "I am Moira McBride, keeper of warnings, speaker of truths. I came across the waters with my clan, but the new land changed me, twisted my gift into something darker." She took a step closer, and the temperature around me dropped another 10 degrees. For 200 years I have wandered these mountains trying to warn the foolish away from danger. But my warnings have become prophecies. My desire to save has become a hunger to claim. "The people who died, you killed them?" Her expression grew sad, and for a moment she looked almost human. "I warn them of the mountain's dangers, but they do not listen. The young man and woman, I told them the ice would claim them if they stayed. They laughed and called me a crazy old woman. The family with the child, I appeared to them in their tent and begged them to leave before the storm worsened. The father threw a stone at me." She raised her arms, and the ice formations around the clearing began to grow, spiraling upward like frozen vines. When they ignore my warnings, the mountain's hunger grows. And I have become the mountain's mouth. I was starting to understand, but I was also starting to feel the cold seeping into my bones. "Jake Hendricks, will he die?" "That depends," she said, "on whether he heeds the warning." "What warning?" "The same warning I give to you, Dorothy McLeod. Leave this place. Do not return when the ice comes. The mountain is hungry, and I can no longer control what it feeds upon." As she spoke, I felt something changing in the air around us. The cold was becoming more than just temperature. It was becoming a presence, reaching into my chest and trying to freeze my heart. "And if I don't leave?" She smiled, and it was the saddest thing I'd ever seen. "Then you will join me in warning others, until the end of time." I should have left. Every instinct told me to get off that mountain, drive back to town, and never return to Rough Ridge again. But I couldn't abandon my post, and I couldn't abandon the people who might come after me. Someone needed to understand what was happening here, and I was starting to realize that someone was me. The next morning, Jake was better. His temperature had stabilized, and he was conscious, though still very weak. But when I visited him in the hospital, I noticed something that made my heart skip. His hair had turned completely white overnight. "The dreams," he whispered when I sat down beside his bed. "I keep having these dreams about the woman in the old dress. She's trying to tell me something, but I can't understand what." "What does she say?" "It's not English. Sounds like maybe Scottish, old Scottish. But in the dream, I understand it anyway." He gripped my hand with fingers that still felt cold. "She's not evil, Dot. She's trapped." That afternoon, I drove to the local library in Boone and asked to see their collection of Highland folklore. What I found changed everything I thought I understood about Moira McBride. According to the historical records, Moira hadn't just been a keening woman, she'd been a bean sheedy, what the Irish call a banshee. But unlike the Hollywood version, banshees weren't harbingers of doom. They were protectors, family spirits who warned of genuine danger so people could avoid it. The problem was what had happened when her clan came to Northern Carolina. In Scotland, her warnings had been respected. People knew that when Moira wailed, it meant real danger was coming. Raiders, storms, disease. They would take precautions and lives would be saved. But in the New World, her warnings fell on deaf ears. The other settlers didn't understand the old ways. They saw a woman in strange clothes making strange sounds and dismissed her as mad. When people died because they hadn't heeded her warnings, her spirit became twisted with grief and frustration. The more people ignored her, the more desperate she became. And the more desperate she became, the more the mountain itself, this ancient, powerful place, responded to her anguish. Her protective instincts had become predatory. She was no longer just warning of danger, she was becoming the danger herself. But there was something else in the records, a detail that made my hands shake as I read it. Moira McBride had been married to a man named Duncan MacLeod. MacLeod, my family name. I drove back up to Rough Ridge that evening, my mind reeling. If the records were right, if I really was descended from Moira's family, then maybe I could reach her. Maybe I could find a way to break this cycle. The weather was getting worse. Another ice storm was moving in, and I could see the temperature dropping as the sun set. I parked at the trailhead and hiked up to the clearing where I'd first seen her, my breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. I didn't have to wait long. As soon as full darkness fell, she appeared. But this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her, barely visible in the shadows, I could see the outlines of other figures. Men, women, children, all wearing clothes from different time periods, all with that same translucent quality, all with eyes like ice. "You came back," Moira said, her voice carrying easily across the clearing. "I hoped you would not. These are the people you couldn't save," I said, gesturing toward the figures behind her. She nodded sadly. "Every soul who ignored my warnings and died for their foolishness. The mountain bound them. To me, made them part of my eternal vigil. They suffer because they would not listen." One of the figures stepped forward. A young man in clothes from the 1800s. When he spoke, frost formed around his words just like with Moira. "She tried to warn me about the bears," he said. "I thought she was just a crazy woman. When the grizzly found my camp, I understood too late." Another spirit moved closer, a woman in a 1940s dress. "The rock slide. She told me not to hike that trail, but I was late getting back to my husband. He's probably still waiting for me." More voices joined in, a chorus of regret and warning. The flash flood, the blizzard, the wolf pack, the poisonous plants. I looked at Moira, understanding flooding through me. "You really were trying to save them." "But I am no longer the protector I once was," she said. "The mountain's hunger has made me its servant. When people ignore my warnings now, I cannot simply let them go. The cold calls to them, draws them to their doom, and I have become the cold." The temperature around us was dropping rapidly now. I could feel it seeping through my winter gear, reaching for my bones. "There has to be a way to break this cycle," I said. "There is," Moira replied. "But the price is higher than you know." "Tell me." She moved closer, and with each step the cold intensified. "Someone must take my place. Someone with the blood of the clans. Someone who understands the weight of responsibility. Someone who will warn others and be believed." I felt the truth of it settling in my stomach like a stone. "You want me to become the new Bean Sheehy." "Not want, child, need. The mountain will not release me unless another takes the burden. And if no one does..." Behind her, the other spirits began to wail, a sound so full of anguish that it made my heart ache. "The hunger will spread," she continued. "Other mountains, other places. The cold will claim everything it touches, and the warnings will become meaningless prophecies of doom." I thought about Jake in the hospital, his hair white from his brief encounter with this force. I thought about the families who had died, the fear in their eyes. I thought about all the people who would come after, who would hike these trails and camp in these mountains, never knowing the danger that waited for them. "If I agree," I said slowly, "what happens to you?" "I find rest at last. The mountain releases me to join my Duncan in whatever comes after." For the first time since I'd seen her, Moira smiled genuinely. "I have been so very tired for so very long." The cold was becoming unbearable now. I could feel it reaching into my chest, slowing my heartbeat, clouding my thoughts. But I also felt something else, a sense of rightness, of purpose, that I'd never experienced before. How do I know people will listen to me? How do I know I won't become like you, trapped and twisted? "Because you have something I did not," she said. "You have the respect of your people. You wear the uniform, carry the authority. When Ranger McLeod warns of danger, people listen. And because you choose this willingly, understanding the burden, the mountain cannot corrupt your purpose." I looked around at the spirits gathered in the clearing, dozens of souls trapped by their own stubbornness and pride. Then I looked at Moira, this ancient woman who had carried the weight of protecting others for so long that it had nearly destroyed her. "Will I be able to save them?" I asked, nodding toward the other spirits. "That will depend on you," she said. "A true Bean-She protects all souls, even those who made poor choices." I closed my eyes and made my decision. I accept. The change was immediate and overwhelming. Power flooded through me. Not the aggressive, hungry power I'd felt from the mountain, but something older and more purposeful. I could suddenly sense every living thing for miles around, the deer hiding in the forest, the few brave birds that hadn't fled south, the hibernating bears in their dens. More importantly, I could sense the dangers that threatened them, ice-weakened branches that would fall, unstable ground that would shift, weather patterns that would bring deadly storms. When I opened my eyes, Moira was already fading. "Thank you," she whispered. "Take care of them." She gestured toward the other spirits, and as she disappeared, I felt their burdens settle onto my shoulders. Not a crushing weight, but a responsibility I knew I could carry. The spirits looked at me with hope for the first time in decades. "What do we do now?" asked the young man who'd been killed by the bear. "Now," I said, feeling the power of the Bean-She flowing through my words, "we protect people the right way." The transformation wasn't as dramatic as I'd expected. I didn't become a ghostly figure doomed to wander the mountains. Instead, I remained very much alive, very much human, but with abilities I was still learning to understand. I could sense danger before it happened. I could feel when weather was going to turn deadly, when trails were about to become unstable, when wildlife was agitated enough to be a threat. Most importantly, when I warned people about these dangers, they listened. There was something in my voice now, an authority that came from the mountains themselves that made people take my warnings seriously. Jake recovered fully from his hypothermia, though his hair stayed white. When he came back to work a month later, he noticed the change in me immediately. "You're different," he said as we stood at the rough ridge overlook, watching tourists enjoy the spring weather. "Calmer, like you found your purpose." I smiled. He had no idea how right he was. "The screaming stopped," he added. "Haven't heard it once since that night in the hospital." "Moira found her rest," I said simply. Jake didn't ask what I meant by that. Some things are better left unexplored. The other spirits, the ones who had been trapped with Moira for so long, were learning to let go of their earthly regrets. One by one, as I helped them understand that their deaths hadn't been meaningless, that their suffering had served a purpose in teaching others, they found peace and moved on. The young man killed by the bear was the first to go, disappearing one night with a grateful smile. My work as a ranger continued, but now it had layers the Park Service never knew about. Officially, I was just Dorothy McLeod, experienced ranger with an uncanny ability to predict weather and spot dangerous conditions. Unofficially, I was the guardian of these mountains, keeper of warnings that people actually heeded. The death rate on my section of the Blue Ridge Parkway dropped to nearly zero. Other rangers started asking for my advice on weather prediction and trail safety. I shared what I could without revealing the true source of my knowledge. 6 months later, I got a call from a ranger in Tennessee. Strange things were happening on their section of the Appalachian Trail. Cold spots, unexplained ice formations, voices in the wind. The description sounded familiar. "It's spreading," I told Jake when I hung up the phone. "What's spreading?" "The need. There are other places where the old spirits are trapped, other mountains where warnings go unheeded." I looked out the window toward the distant ridges. "I think I might need to take some vacation time." That autumn, I requested a transfer to a position that would let me travel between different sections of the Appalachian Range. The Park Service was happy to have a ranger with my safety record working on a larger scale. I found her in the Great Smoky Mountains, another bean she, this one a Cherokee woman who had been trying to warn her people about Europe and diseases for over 200 years. Like Moira, she had been twisted by centuries of being ignored and dismissed. Like Moira, she was ready to rest. The pattern repeated in Virginia, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. Ancient spirits, protectors who had become predators, guardians whose warnings had become curses. Each time, I offered to take their burden, and each time, they found the peace they'd been seeking for centuries. But I wasn't accumulating these burdens alone. With each spirit I helped, I gained allies, other guardians who understood the true purpose of our calling. We formed a network of protection that stretched across the entire Appalachian Range, watching over hikers and campers, warning them away from real dangers, keeping the mountains safe for those who respected them. People started calling it the McLeod effect, the way dangerous weather always seemed to be predicted just in time, the way rock slides and flash floods always seemed to happen just after trails were closed, the way wildlife encounters dropped to almost nothing in areas where I worked. I let them think it was just good ranger work and better weather prediction. The truth was something they weren't ready to understand. On quiet evenings at Rough Ridge, I sometimes saw Moira one more time. Not trapped and anguished like before, but peaceful, standing beside a tall man in Highland dress who could only be her Duncan. They would wave to me across the clearing, a gesture of gratitude and farewell, before fading into the mountain mist. The old spirits were finding rest, but new dangers were always emerging. Climate change was making weather more unpredictable. More people were visiting the mountains with less experience and preparation. The need for protection, for warnings that would be heeded, was greater than ever. But I was no longer alone in this work. Across the Appalachian Range, other rangers were developing the same intuitive understanding of their territories. Some were descendants of the old families like me. Others were simply people who loved the mountains, enough to accept the responsibility of protecting them. We didn't talk about it openly. There are some things the Park Service is better off not knowing. But we shared information, covered each other's territories when needed, and made sure that no dangerous situation went unaddressed. 20 years later, I'm still at my post, though I've trained successors who understand both the visible and invisible aspects of mountain safety. The Blue Ridge Parkway is safer now than it's ever been, not just because of better equipment and training, but because the mountains themselves have guardians who truly understand what it means to protect people. Sometimes, on foggy nights when the conditions are just right, visitors to Grandfather Mountain report hearing the distant sound of bagpipes echoing through the valleys. They think it's just the wind playing tricks with their ears, but I know better. It's the sound of the Highland clans at rest, finally at peace in their new home across the waters. Moira and Duncan, reunited at last, playing the old songs for those who still remember the true meaning of the mountains. And sometimes, when I'm doing my evening rounds and the mist is thick enough to hide secrets, I hear my own name carried on that music. Not a warning this time, but a welcome. A reminder that I chose this path willingly and that the choice was right. The mountains are safe now. The warnings are heard. The old spirits rest in peace. But I remain vigilant because the mountains are eternal, and there will always be those who need protection from dangers they cannot see or understand. My name is Dorothy McLeod, and I am the guardian of these ancient hills. When I warn you to turn back, to seek shelter, to respect the power of the wilderness, you would be wise to listen. The Beanshi protects those who respect the mountains, but for those who ignore the warnings, well, the mountains are patient and they have a very long memory. And now somewhere on a ridge in North Carolina, if you listen carefully on a foggy night, you might hear the sound of bagpipes carried on the wind. A reminder that some guardians never truly leave their post, and some warnings echo through eternity. The mountain screamer no longer screams in anguish. Now she sings lullabies to keep the mountains peaceful, and her voice carries the wisdom of centuries to those who have ears to hear. But she still watches. She always watches. And she always will. My name is William Hancock, but everybody calls me Billy. I've been a park ranger here in the Daniel Boone National Forest for 9 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these Kentucky mountains could throw at me. Bears, wildcats, lost hikers, illegal hunters, you name it. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what happened in October of 1961. I grew up in these hills. My daddy ran moonshine back in the day, same as his daddy before him. When I was a boy, I could tell you every hollow, every hidden still, every creek that ran clear enough to make good liquor. That knowledge served me well when I became a ranger. Who better to find illegal stills than someone who grew up around them? My wife Sarah was 7 months along with our third child when this all started. She'd been having a hard time with this pregnancy, staying tired and sick most days. Our 2 boys, Tommy and Jake, were 8 and 6, old enough to help around the house, but young enough to still believe their daddy could handle anything. I wish I could still be that man they thought I was. The morning it began, I was checking the Red River Gorge area for illegal hunting camps. It was October 15th, and hunting season had just opened. The first snow had already dusted the ridges, making everything look clean and peaceful. The leaves were at their peak, reds and golds that took your breath away. It should have been a perfect day. I found the first bodies around 9 in the morning. 3 federal revenue agents, all dead at what used to be a moonshine still. But this wasn't like any still destruction I'd ever seen. The copper tubing wasn't smashed or chopped up like usual. It was melted, twisted into shapes that didn't make sense, like someone had heated it until it flowed like water. The bodies were the worst part. They looked like all the blood had been sucked right out of them. Skin white as paper, eyes sunken back in their skulls. And the smell. Lord, the smell. Like rotten eggs mixed with something sweet and sick. It made my stomach turn. I'd seen plenty of violence in these mountains. Clan feuds, revenue raids gone wrong, desperate men doing desperate things. But this was different. This felt wrong in a way that made the hair on my neck stand up. What really got to me was the quiet. No birds singing, no insects buzzing, nothing. Even the wind seemed afraid to blow through that hollow. I'd been in the woods my whole life, and I'd never heard silence like that. It was like the very earth was holding its breath. I radioed headquarters and told them what I'd found. They said they'd send backup and told me to secure the scene. So I waited, smoking cigarettes and trying not to look too close at those poor boys' faces. They couldn't have been much older than me. That's when I noticed my watch had stopped. The second hand was just sitting there, not moving. I tapped the face, shook my wrist, but nothing. It had been running fine that morning when I left the house. Then I saw the trees. Every oak, maple, and pine within 50 yards of the still was dying. Leaves brown and curled, bark peeling off in chunks. Some of the smaller saplings looked like they'd been hit with poison. In all my years, I'd never seen anything kill forest like that. By the time the backup arrived, 2 other rangers and a federal agent named Thompson, I was ready to get out of that hollow. But Thompson wanted to investigate further. He was a thin, nervous man from Lexington, all business and no sense about the mountains. "Ranger Hancock," he said, studying the melted copper. "What do you make of this equipment damage?" I looked at it again, really looked. The metal wasn't just melted, it was twisted into patterns. Almost like someone had been writing with it while it was liquid hot. But that was impossible. You'd need temperatures that would burn down the whole forest. "I don't rightly know," I told him. "Never seen copper bend like that." "Any idea who might have done this? Local families with a grudge against federal agents?" I thought about that. There were plenty of folks in these mountains who didn't care for revenue men, my own family included. But this wasn't mountain justice. This was something else entirely. "Agent Thompson," I said, "I've lived here all my life. I know every family, every feud, every man who ever ran liquor through these hills. This ain't the work of any person I know." He wrote something in his little notebook. "Well, someone did this, and I intend to find out who." I wanted to tell him that maybe some things were better left alone, that these mountains had secrets older than the government, older than the revenue service, older than any law written by men in suits. But city folk don't listen to talk like that. They think mountain people are just superstitious. As we walked back to our vehicles, I caught myself looking over my shoulder every few steps. The feeling of being watched was so strong I could taste it. But every time I turned around, there was nothing there but dead trees and shadows that seemed too dark for midday. That night, I sat on my porch with Sarah, telling her about my day, but leaving out the worst parts. She had enough to worry about with the baby coming. The boys played in the yard while we talked, their laughter mixing with the evening sounds of crickets and tree frogs. "Billy," Sarah said, resting her hand on her belly, "you be careful out there. I've got a bad feeling about something." "What kind of feeling?" "Hard to say. Like a storm coming, but not the weather kind." I kissed her forehead and told her not to worry. But as I watched the boys chase fireflies in the growing dark, I couldn't shake the memory of that hollow, the silence, the dead trees. The way my watch had stopped, like time itself was afraid to pass through that place. If I'd known then what is coming, I would have packed up my family that very night and driven as far from those mountains as our old Ford could take us. But I didn't know. And by the time I understood what we were dealing with, it was already too late to run. 3 days passed before I had to go back to the Red River Gorge. 3 peaceful days where I almost convinced myself that what I'd seen was just bad liquor and worse luck. Almost. Thompson had been busy those 3 days, questioning locals and tracking down anyone who might have known about the still. He was making people nervous, asking too many questions about things mountain folk preferred to keep private. I tried to warn him that pushing too hard might cause more problems than it solved, but he wouldn't listen. "Ranger Hancock," he said when we met at the ranger station that morning, "I need you to show me the other known still locations in this area. If someone's targeting federal operations, we need to check every site." I didn't like it, but it was my job. So I led him deeper into the gorge to places most people couldn't find if they had a map and a compass. The morning was bright and clear, but I noticed the temperature dropped as soon as we entered the hollow where we'd found the bodies. The first site we checked was an old still that had been abandoned for maybe 10 years. Nothing left but some rusted pipes and a stone foundation. But as we got closer, I smelled that same sick, sweet smell from 3 days before. "Agent Thompson," I said, stopping dead in my tracks, "we need to be careful here." "Why?" It's just an old still." But it wasn't just an old still anymore. The metal pipes that had been rusted solid for years were now twisted into the same impossible shapes we'd seen at the murder site. The stones of the foundation had scorch marks burned deep into the rock, and in the center of it all was a dark stain that looked lit. Key blood but smelled like sulfur. "This is fresh," I told Thompson. "This happened recent." He knelt down to examine the blood stain, pulling out his camera to take pictures. "Have you ever seen anything like this before?" I was about to say no when I remembered something my grandfather told me years ago. A story about a moonshiner named Ezekiel Caudle who got killed in a federal raid back in 1932. Grandpa said Ezekiel swore with his dying breath that he'd never let the government destroy what he'd built. Said he'd come back from hell itself to protect his stills. But that was just an old story, mountain folklore, the kind of tale old men told to scare children away from dangerous places. "Ranger Hancock?" Thompson was staring at me. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just thinking," I said. "Maybe we should head back." That's when we heard the sound. It started low, like wind through a cave, but there wasn't any wind that day. Then it got louder, turning into something that might have been crying or might have been laughing. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, the trees, the rocks, the very air around us. Thompson had gone pale. "What is that?" Before I could answer, the temperature dropped another 20 degrees in the space of a few seconds. Our breath started showing in little white puffs, and ice began forming on the nearby creek. Then we saw the flames. Blue flames, dancing in the air about 10 feet away from us. No fuel, no source, just fire hanging in the air like it was painted there. They moved like they were alive, reaching toward us, then pulling back, almost like they were curious. "Jesus Christ," Thompson whispered, fumbling for his gun. "Don't," I said, grabbing his arm. "Don't make it angry." The flames pulsed brighter, and suddenly there was a shape inside them. A man-shaped shadow, tall and thin, missing the left side of his face. The shadow raised one arm, pointing directly at Thompson. Then, as quick as they'd appeared, the flames vanished. The temperature shot back up to normal, and the sound stopped like someone had turned it off a radio. We stood there for maybe 5 minutes, neither of us saying a word. Finally, Thompson holstered his gun with shaking hands. "What the hell was that?" he asked. I thought about my grandfather's story, about Ezekiel Caudle and his dying curse, about the old mountain belief that some grudges ran too deep for death to settle. "I think," I said slowly, "we might be dealing with something that ain't exactly alive." Thompson laughed, but it was a scared laugh. "Come on, Hancock, you don't believe in ghosts." A week ago, I would have agreed with you, but I've never seen metal melt itself, and I've never seen fire burn without fuel. We made our way back to the vehicles in silence. But as we walked, I kept catching glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision. Shadows that didn't match up with the trees. Shapes that vanished the moment I tried to look at them directly. At the truck, Thompson sat in the passenger seat staring at his hands. They were shaking so bad he couldn't light his cigarette. "This doesn't make sense," he said. "There has to be a rational explanation." I started the engine and began driving us out of the hollow. "Thompson, I've lived in these mountains for 33 years. I know what's normal and what ain't. What we just saw ain't normal." "So what are you saying? That some dead moonshiner is killing federal agents?" I thought about it as we bounced along the rough trail. "I'm saying maybe some debts don't get settled when you die. Maybe some anger burns too hot to put out." That afternoon, I went to see my grandfather. He was 92 years old and sharp as a tack, with memories that went back to the early days of Prohibition. If anyone would know about Ezekiel Caudle, it would be him. "Grandpa," I said, sitting on his porch, "tell me about Ezekiel Caudle." His face went serious. "Why you asking about him, Billy?" I told him what he'd found, what we'd seen, about the melted metal and the blue flames, about the shape with half a face missing. When I finished, Grandpa was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spit tobacco, juice into his coffee can, and looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. Ezekiel Caudle was the finest moonshiner these mountains ever produced, he said. Could make liquor so smooth it was like drinking liquid silk. But he was also the angriest man I ever knew. Hated the government, hated the revenue agents, hated anyone who tried to tell him what he could and couldn't do. What happened to him? Federal raid in the winter of '32. They came for his still, but Ezekiel wouldn't give up without a fight. Shot 3 agents before they got him. But here's the thing. When they finally cornered him, they say he was standing right next to his still, holding a torch. Told them if he couldn't have his operation, nobody could. Grandpa paused to take a drink of water. His hands weren't shaking, but I could see he was troubled. They shot him, Billy. Shot him dead while he was holding that torch. The flame fell into a puddle of pure alcohol, and the hole still went up like a bomb. Burned so hot it melted the copper pipes and scorched the rock. Ezekiel's body was burned so bad they couldn't even tell where the bullet holes were. Where's he buried? That's just it. He ain't. Never found enough of him to bury. They say his spirit went into those flames, and on certain nights you can still see him walking between the old still sites, looking for revenue agents to settle the score. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Grandpa, you think that's what we're dealing with? He nodded slowly. I think Ezekiel Caudle is back, and he's got 30 years of anger built up inside him. And Billy, if I were you, I'd stay away from those hollows. Some fights are too old and too mean for the living to get involved in. But I couldn't stay away. It was my job to protect those mountains and the people in them, even if one of the things I needed to protect them from had been dead for nearly 30 years. That night, I held Sarah a little closer and listened to my boys breathing in their beds. I had the feeling that something was coming, something that would test everything I thought I knew about life and death and the spaces in between. I just didn't know how right I was. The second attack happened 4 days later, and this time I was there when it started. Thompson had convinced his superiors to send more agents to investigate what they were calling domestic terrorism against federal operations. 6 men arrived from Louisville, all armed with the latest equipment and absolutely no understanding of what they were walking into. I tried to warn them, told them about what Thompson and I had seen, about the blue flames and the impossible heat that could melt copper. They looked at me like I was some backwoods fool telling ghost stories to cover up for local criminals. Ranger Hancock, said Agent Morrison, their leader, we appreciate your cooperation, but we don't need mountain folklore to solve federal crimes. What we need are facts, evidence, and arrests. So I took them to the stills. All of them. Every location I knew about in a 20-mile radius. By evening, we'd covered 8 sites, and 7 of them showed signs of the same impossible melting. The agents took photographs, collected samples, and made notes. But I could see they were getting nervous. The 8th site was different. It was an active still, hidden deep in a hollow that most people couldn't find if their lives depended on it. I'd known about it for years, but looked the other way. The old man who ran it, Jasper Caudle, was just trying to make ends meet, and his liquor was so good it was practically medicine. But when we got there, Jasper's still was gone. Not destroyed, not abandoned, gone, like it had never existed. In its place was a circle of dead earth abbot, out 30 feet across. Nothing would grow there, not even weeds. And in the center of the circle was something that made my blood run cold. It was Jasper himself, or what was left of him. He was sitting against a tree, looking for all the world like he'd just decided to take a nap. But when Morrison went to check on him, we realized the truth. Every drop of blood had been drained from his body. His skin was paper white and stretched tight over his bones. His eyes were wide open, staring at something the rest of us couldn't see. Jesus, whispered Agent Collins, the youngest of the group. What did this to him? I knelt down next to Jasper's body, being careful not to disturb anything. That's when I noticed his hands. They were burned, not from fire but from cold. The skin was blackened and cracked like he'd grabbed onto something so cold it froze the flesh right off his bones. Morrison, I said, we need to get out of here. Now. Why? This is a crime scene. We need to document everything. Because whoever did this might still be around. As if my words were a signal, the temperature started dropping. Fast. In the space of 30 seconds, it went from a pleasant October evening to colder than a January night. Our breath began showing, and ice started forming on the creek. Then came the sound, that low moaning that seemed to come from everywhere at once. But this time it was louder, angrier, like whatever was making it had been disturbed and wasn't happy about it. "What is that?" Morrison had his gun out, spinning around trying to find a target. The blue flames appeared then, but not just a few like before. Dozens of them dancing through the trees around us. They moved like they were alive, circling us, getting closer with each pass. "Nobody move," I said as quietly as I could. "Don't run. Don't shoot. Don't do anything to make it mad." But Agent Collins panicked. He started shooting at the flames, his bullets passing right through them without effect. The moment his gun went off, every flame in the circle flared brighter. That's when we saw him. Easy. Keel Caudle stepped out of the largest flame like he was walking through a doorway. He was tall and thin, dressed in overalls that looked like they'd been burned and reformed 100 times. The left side of his face was gone, showing charred bone underneath. His eyes were holes filled with blue fire. When he spoke, his voice sounded like wood crackling in a fireplace. "More government men," he said, looking at each of us in turn. "Come to steal what ain't theirs. Come to destroy what took generations to build." Morrison tried to shoot him. The bullets passed right through Caudle's body like he was made of smoke. Caudle laughed, and the sound made icicles form on the nearby branches. "You can't kill what's already dead," Caudle said. Then he raised his right hand. Collins screamed as his jacket burst into flames. Not normal flames, blue fire that burned without consuming. The man rolled on the ground, beating at the flames, but they wouldn't go out. Morrison and the other agents opened fire, but their bullets did nothing. "Stop!" I shouted, stepping between Caudle and Collins. "He's just a boy. He don't know no better." Caudle's fiery gaze fixed on me. "You're Hancock, Billy Hancock. Your granddaddy knew me." "Yes, sir, he did. And he told me you were an honorable man, a man who protected his family and his trade." The flames on Collins flickered and went out. The young agent curled up on the ground, whimpering but alive. "Honorable," Caudle repeated. "They shot me down like a dog for protecting what was mine. 30 years I've been waiting for justice." "This ain't justice," I said, gesturing toward Jasper's body. "This is just killing. He was stealing from my stills, using my recipes, my territory. Jasper Caudle was your great-nephew, your own blood." For a moment, the fire in Caudle's eyes flickered. "Jasper, your brother Thomas's grandson. He was make it, and liquor to feed his family just like you did." The flames around us began to dim. Caudle looked confused, lost. I thought they were all gone. All my people." "They're not gone. Your family is still here, still living in these mountains, still making the finest liquor in Kentucky." Morrison chose that moment to make another stupid decision. While Caudle was distracted, he pulled out a flare gun and fired it directly at the spirit. The flare passed through Caudle's chest, but the effect was immediate and terrible. The spirit's confusion vanished, replaced by rage so pure it made the air around us shimmer with heat. "Enough!" Caudle roared. Morrison's uniform burst into flames. Then Agent Davis. Then Agent Thompson, who had been trying to circle around behind the spirit. One by one, the federal agents began burning with that cold blue fire. I grabbed Collins, who was still on the ground, and started dragging him toward the trees. "Run!" I shouted to anyone who could still hear me. "Get to the creek!" Caudle's laughter followed us as we stumbled through the darkness. Behind us, men screamed as the supernatural fire consumed them. But the worst part wasn't the screaming. It was when the screaming stopped. Collins and I made it to the creek and threw ourselves into the water. The cold was like a slap, but it was normal cold, the kind that made sense. Behind us, the flames rose higher, turning the whole hollow into a vision of hell. When it was over, when the flames finally died down and the temperature returned to normal, we climbed out of the creek and surveyed the damage. 5 federal agents were dead, their bodies drained of blood, just like the first victims. The trees in a 100-yard radius were charred black. The very rocks showed scorch marks that would probably last forever. Collins was in shock, babbling about blue fire and dead men walking. I managed to get him back to the truck and drove straight to the ranger station. While he was being treated for shock and minor burns, I called his superiors in Louisville. "This is Ranger Hancock," I said when they answered. "I need to speak with whoever's in charge of the Caudle investigation." "One moment, please." A gruff voice came on the line. "This is Deputy Director Walsh. Ranger Hancock, we've been expecting your call. Agent Morrison hasn't checked in." I took a deep breath. "Sir, Agent Morrison is dead." "They're all dead except for Collins." Silence on the other end. Then, what happened? How do you tell a federal law enforcement official that his men were killed by a ghost? How do you explain that some things in this world don't follow the rules that city folks understand? "Sir," I said, "I think this case needs to be closed. Permanently. What you're dealing with here ain't something that can be arrested or prosecuted." "Ranger Hancock, are you telling me you can't do your job?" "I'm telling you that some jobs are too dangerous to do, and this is one of them." But they didn't listen. They never do. The next morning, they sent 12 more agents. By the time the new team arrived, I'd made my decision. I was going to end this one way or another. Sarah was getting close to her time, and I couldn't have my boys growing up in mountains haunted by a vengeful spirit with a 30-year-old grudge. The new agents were different from the first batch. These were older men, veterans who'd seen combat. Their leader, Special Agent Frank Blackwood, had dead eyes and scars on his hands. When I told him what had happened to Morrison's team, he listened without interruption. "Ranger Hancock," he said when I finished, "I've seen some strange things in my 20 years with the Bureau. Things that don't make it into official reports. I'm inclined to believe your story." "Then you know we can't fight this thing with guns and badges." "Maybe not, but we can't let it keep killing federal agents either. There has to be a way to stop it." I'd been thinking about that all night. About what my grandfather had told me, about what I'd seen in that hollow. Ezekiel Caudle wasn't evil. He was angry. There's a difference. Evil enjoys causing pain, but anger can sometimes be reasoned with. "I think I know a way," I said, "but you're not going to like it." That afternoon I went to see Ezekiel Caudle's surviving family. It took some doing, but I finally tracked down his grandniece, Martha Caudle Stevens. She was a tough old woman who ran a small farm up in the hills and wasn't afraid of much. "Martha," I said, sitting in her kitchen drinking coffee that could strip paint, "I need to ask you about your great-uncle Ezekiel." Her face went hard. "What about him?" I told her everything, about the killings, about seeing Ezekiel's spirit, about the blue flames and the impossible cold. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "I always wondered when he'd come back," she finally said. "Mama used to say Uncle Zeke was too stubborn to stay dead, too angry about what they'd done to him. Martha, I need to know where he's buried, his real burial place. He ain't buried nowhere. They never found enough of him to put in the ground. Then where would he go? If his spirit was tied to something, what would it be?" Martha thought about that, staring out her kitchen window at the mountains. "The original still," she said. "The one where he died, up in Devil's Hollow. That's where his heart was, where he put everything he cared about." Devil's Hollow. I'd heard of it, but never been there. It was supposed to be cursed ground, a place where bad things happened to good people. Most folks avoided it entirely. "Can you take me there?" "I can tell you how to find it, but Billy, if you go up there, you might not come back." "I have to try. This can't go on." That night I kissed Sarah and the boys goodbye. I didn't tell them where I was going or what I planned to do. Some burdens are meant to be carried alone. Blackwood insisted on coming with me, along with 2 of his best men. I tried to talk him out of it, but he wouldn't listen. "If this Hing has been killing federal agents," he said, "then it's federal business." We climbed into Devil's Hollow just before dawn. The path was overgrown and treacherous, winding through country that felt wrong from the moment we set foot on it. No birds sang, no squirrels chattered. Even the wind seemed afraid to blow through those trees. The original still site was exactly where Martha said it would be, in a clearing near the head of a small creek. But what we found there wasn't just the remains of a moonshine operation. It was something much older and more dangerous. The copper tubing from Ezekiel's still had melted and reformed into strange patterns on the ground. They looked almost like words, but in no language I recognized. The rocks around the site were scorched black, and the earth itself seemed to pulse with an inner heat. "Jesus Christ," whispered Agent Kowalski, one of Blackwood's men. "What is this place?" Before I could answer, the temperature plummeted. Ice began forming on the creek, and that familiar sound started up, the moaning that seemed to come from the earth itself. But this time was different. This time, Ezekiel Caudle didn't just appear in the flames. He rose up out of the melted copper like he was being born from it. He looked more solid than before, more real, and infinitely more angry. "You brought them here," he said, his voice like thunder rolling through the hollow, "to my sacred place, to the ground where I died for my principles." "Ezekiel," I said, stepping forward, "I came to talk." "Talk?" He laughed, and the sound made the trees creak and sway. 30 years I've been waiting, and you want to talk? I want to understand. You were a man protecting his family, his livelihood. I respect that. But killing innocent people won't bring back what you lost." "Innocent?" The flames around him flared higher. "They destroyed everything I built. Everything my father built and his father before him. 3 generations of work gone in one night." "The prohibition's over, Ezekiel. Has been for almost 30 years. Nobody's hunting moonshiners anymore." "Lies!" He pointed a burning finger at Blackwood and his men. "More government men. Come to finish what they started." That's when Blackwood made his move. Instead of trying to shoot Caudle, he pulled out something I hadn't expected, a small vial of clear liquid. "Holy water," he said, tossing it at the spirit. The water passed right through Caudle without effect, but the spirit's reaction was immediate and violent. The flames around him turned from blue to white-hot, and the temperature spiked so high that my clothes began to smoke. "Blasphemy!" Caudle roared. "You dare bring church magic against me?" Agent Kowalski screamed as his hair burst into flames. Agent Martinez dropped to the ground, his uniform burning with that impossible cold fire. Blackwood himself was engulfed in flames but kept standing, kept fighting, even as the fire consumed him. I had one chance, one desperate gamble based on something my grandfather had told me years ago. "Ezekiel!" I shouted over the roar of supernatural fire. "Your family needs you." The flames flickered. "My family is dead." "No, they're not. Martha Stevens is still alive. So is her daughter and her daughter's children. The Caudle bloodline continues, and they still make the finest liquor in these mountains." "You lie." I pulled out something I'd brought from Martha's house, a small glass jar filled with clear liquid. "This is Caudle liquor," I said, holding it up. "Made from your own recipe, passed down through 4 generations. Taste it, and tell me your family is gone." Caudle stared at the jar like it was the most precious thing in the world. Slowly, the flames around him began to dim. "Let me taste it," he said. I threw the jar to him. His ghostly hands caught it, and for a moment he held it up to the light like he was examining a diamond. Then he unscrewed the cap and took a drink. The change was immediate. The white-hot flames turned back to blue, then dimmed to barely visible flickers. The temperature returned to normal. The screaming stopped. "This is..." Caudle's voice was softer now, almost human. "This is my recipe, my father's recipe. Made by your blood, Ezekiel. Your family remembers. They remember everything you taught them." He looked at me with eyes that were no longer filled with fire, but with something like hope. "They remember? They do. And they honor you." Every drop of liquor they make is a tribute to what you built. The flames around Caudle began to fade entirely. He looked smaller now, more like the man he'd been in life, and less like the vengeful spirit he'd become. "I've been so angry," he said, "so lost. I thought they'd destroyed everything. They destroyed the stills, Ezekiel. They couldn't destroy the knowledge. They couldn't destroy the love." Caudle nodded slowly. Then he looked at the burning agents. With a gesture, he extinguished the supernatural flames. Blackwood collapsed, badly burned but alive. Martinez and Kowalski were unconscious but breathing. "I need to rest now," Caudle said. "I need to find peace." "Where will you go?" He smiled, and for a moment I could see the man he'd been. Proud, stubborn, but fundamentally decent. "Home," he said. "I'm going home." The flames around him flared one last time, then vanished completely. The melted copper on the ground cracked and crumbled to dust. The scorch marks on the rocks began to fade. Within minutes, there was nothing left to show that anything supernatural had ever happened in Devil's Hollow, except for the 3 badly burned federal agents who would need some explaining. The official report said that Agent Morrison's team had been killed in an explosion at an illegal methane distillation operation. Agent Blackwood's team had been injured in a secondary explosion while investigating the site. Accidental deaths, workplace hazards, nothing more. I signed off on that report without a word of complaint. Some truths are too dangerous to put in official files. Blackwood spent 6 weeks in the hospital with third-degree burns over 60% of his body. When he was finally discharged, he came to see me at the ranger station. "Hancock," he said, his voice rough from smoke inhalation, "what really happened up there?" "You were investigating a methane leak," I said. "There was an explosion. You got hurt." He stared at me for a long moment. "And the blue flames? The man made of fire?" "Don't know what you're talking about." "My men remember everything. So do I." Memory can be a tricky thing after trauma. Sometimes the mind makes up stories to explain what it can't understand. Blackwood nodded slowly. "Maybe so. But Hancock, if something like this ever happens again, you call me. Not the local office, not headquarters. You call me directly." He left me his personal number and I tucked it away in my desk drawer. I had a feeling I might need it someday. Sarah gave birth to our daughter 2 weeks later. We named her Hope because after everything that had happened, Hope seemed like the most precious thing in the world. She was healthy and beautiful with her mother's eyes and what I hoped was her father's common sense. The boys adapted quickly to having a little sister, and life settled back into something like normal. I went back to my regular ranger duties, tracking poachers, helping lost hikers, maintaining trails. But I found myself changing how I did my job. When I came across small family operations tucked away in remote hollows, I started looking the other way more often. As long as they weren't selling to kids or causing trouble, I figured the mountains had seen enough violence over moonshine. Ezekiel Caudle's anger had taught me something about the difference between the letter of the law and the spirit of justice. Martha Stevens started visiting us regularly, bringing Hope little gifts and telling stories about the old days. She never mentioned what had happened in Devil's Hollow, but sometimes I caught her looking at me with knowing eyes. The mountain families have their own ways of saying thank you. About 6 months after the incident, I was patrolling near Red River Gorge when I smelled something familiar. That sweet corn mash smell that meant someone was running a still nearby. I followed my nose to a well-hidden operation that was producing some of the finest liquor I'd ever encountered. The operator was a young man named David Caudle, Martha's grandson. When he saw me coming, he didn't run or try to hide. He just stood there waiting. "You gonna arrest me, Ranger Hancock?" he asked. I looked at his setup, clean, well-organized, producing maybe 5 gallons a week. Enough for family and a few friends, nothing commercial. "That depends," I said. "You selling to kids?" "No, sir, never." "You selling to outsiders? Bringing trouble to the community?" "No, sir, just family and a few neighbors." I nodded and turned to leave. Then I don't see anything here worth arresting anybody over. As I walked away, David called after me. Ranger Hancock, thank you for what you did for Uncle Ezekiel. Family means everything to us. I didn't answer, but I understood. In the mountains, some debts run deeper than law, and some justice is more important than rules. But the story doesn't end there. It never really ends. Sometimes on cold October nights when the moon is dark and the wind is still, people report seeing blue flames dancing over the old still sites in Devil's Hollow. Hikers tell stories of a tall figure watching them from the tree line, making sure they don't disturb anything that shouldn't be disturbed. And every now and then, when federal agents get too aggressive in their investigations of mountain families, they find their equipment mysteriously malfunctioning. Watches stop working. Metal corrodes overnight. Vehicles break down for no apparent reason. The locals just smile and suggest that maybe city folks should stick to city problems. My hands bare. Permanent scars from that night in Devil's Hollow. Not from burns, but from something colder than ice. They ache sometimes when the weather changes, and they get painful whenever I shake hands with federal law enforcement officers. It's like my body remembers what my mind sometimes tries to forget. I still patrol those mountains, though I'm getting close to retirement age. My boys are grown now, with families of their own. Hope is 16 and already showing signs of having her daddy's stubborn streak and her mama's good sense. When she asks me about my job, I tell her that a ranger's most important duty isn't enforcing laws. It's understanding the land and the people who live on it. Some nights, when I'm sitting on my porch, listening to the sounds of the forest, I think about Ezekiel Caudle. I think about the anger that kept him bound to this world for 30 years and the family love that finally set him free. I think about the difference between justice and revenge, between protecting what's yours and destroying what threatens you. The mountains keep their secrets well. Most of the federal agents who survived that October never talked about what they saw. Blackwood retired early and moved to Florida, as far from Kentucky as he could get. Agent Collins left law enforcement entirely and became a teacher. But the families remember. The mountain people always remember. They tell stories about the still master who came back from the dead to protect his kinfolk, and about the ranger who helped put an angry spirit to rest. Those stories get passed down from father to son, mother to daughter, generation to generation. And sometimes, just sometimes, when the corn is high and the moon is right, you can still catch a whiff of that perfect caudle liquor on the mountain breeze. It smells like history and tradition and family pride all mixed together. They say that smell me. And Ezekiel is still watching, still protecting his people in his own way. Not with anger anymore, but with love. The way a man should protect what matters to him. I choose to believe that's true. In these mountains, some stories are too important not to believe. And if you ever find yourself hiking through Devil's Hollow on a cold October night and you see blue flames dancing in the distance, my advice is simple. Show respect, move along quietly, and remember that some things in this world are bigger than badges and laws and the rules that city folks live by. The mountains remember everything, and they never forget.